Bran Stark could scarcely tell where the dream ended and the morning began. He lay in his bed within the castle at Winterfell, head propped on a pillow, gazing into the dim shadows dancing along the gray stone walls. He had woken from restless sleep, limbs trembling. That sense of dread clung to him as if it were part of his very skin, a cold sweat beading on his brow. There was always something about these dreams, these visions, that felt larger than anything he had known. It seemed that every night, the distance between wakefulness and sleep dwindled, the edges blending like paint left out in the rain. He tried to recall the images that had seized his mind, tall shapes, swirling cloaks, swords drawn in anger, and his father's face contorted with shock. There was a chill in the wind that moaned through the corridors, a pale hush that told him the hour was still quite early. But that small bit of clarity did not dispel the lingering sense of urgency in his chest, nor did it banish the unshakable feeling that something dark and catastrophic was uncoiling far to the south. He blinked, forcing himself upright. Summer, Bran's direwolf, raised her head from where she lay sprawled near the bed, ears erect as if she too had sensed something. The wolf's yellow eyes caught the faint torchlight coming through the doorway. Bran reached out with trembling fingers to gently run his hand through the creature's thick fur. Summer gave a low whine, as though cautioning him. Some dreams you can ignore, he knew. But these recent visions came like ravens from a storm, black-winged omens crowding the horizon of his thoughts. He felt them call to him in ways he did not fully understand, whispering glimpses of the future. For days he had wrestled with half-remembered fragments, whispers of betrayal in the Red Keep, steel glinting in torchlight, an argument in the throne room. Then there was the image of his father, Lord Eddard Stark, kneeling in defeat, forced by Lannister blades to surrender. He saw the flash of gold and crimson cloaks, the cold gleam of a sword pressed to Ned Stark's neck, and heard the distant echo of commands shouted. A meltdown of order in King's Landing. A collapse that would cost them everything. Bran took a shaky breath, leaning back against the pillows. If this was only a dream, it was the worst he had ever had. But he knew too well that his condition, his strange affliction, gave him access to sights beyond what was normal or natural. Old Nan had once whispered about green dreams, stories of those blessed or cursed to see things that had not yet come to pass. He thought of the old gods in the weirwoods, their scarlet eyes carved into ancient trunks, gazing through the centuries. Was this the power that kept surfacing within him? He needed to warn his father, who had left for King's Landing days ago. Even if part of Bran's mind recoiled from the notion that his father might not believe him, he had no choice. There was a certainty in the pit of his stomach. If he did not speak, if he let it lie, tragedy would befall them all. With cautious deliberation, Bran nudged himself to the edge of the bed. He sighed with frustration. His legs were as unresponsive as ever, and the memory of falling from the tower, all those weeks past, haunted him still. Yet he had found ways to move forward, using a special harness, or being carried by Hodor, the gentle giant of a stable boy. But in this moment, he just needed to reach for the parchment and quill on the bedside table. He fumbled for them, biting his lip to steady his trembling hand. Summer's watchful presence soothed him somewhat, as if the wolf's mere existence was a promise that he wasn't alone. Bran's heart pounded as he started scrawling the words in a hasty script. Father, I have seen things in my dreams. Terrible things. You must be wary of those who smile to your face but work against you in darkness. There is a plan against our family in King's Landing. The Lannisters are not to be trusted. You must move carefully. Trust none but those you are sure of, or they will turn you into a prisoner. They seek your downfall, Father. They seek our family's downfall. The king is in danger as well. Please heed me. He paused for a moment, considering how much detail to divulge. If he wrote too explicitly, would it give away too much of his own condition, or risk the letter being intercepted by prying eyes in the capital? But he needed to be clear. There was no point in half measures. Someone had to understand. He added a few more lines, about his vision, about the golden cloaks and the Lannister sigil. There was a dream of a gored boar, something about King Robert's hunt ending in blood. He could not leave it unsaid, so he included it. If that could save the king's life, then it was worth every risk. When he was done, his hand was aching. He folded the parchment, addressing it to Lord Eddard Stark, the hand of the king, to be delivered without delay. He would insist that Maester Luwin send it by raven immediately. Bran exhaled slowly, hardly aware that he was trembling even more than before. The words were out of him now. A sense of relief crept into his chest, tempered by the deeper knowledge that, from here on, fate was uncertain. He could only pray to the old gods that this dire warning reached his father in time. At dawn, the raven soared south, wings beating the wind. Summer, behind the window slit, watched the black speck vanish into the cloud-streaked sky. And so the wheels of destiny were nudged toward a new path. Eddard Stark sat behind his sturdy oak desk in his chambers at the Red Keep, the first glimmers of sunlight washing across the tapestry-laden walls. He was in his bedclothes, hair still rumpled from sleep. His shoulders felt perpetually tense since his arrival in King's Landing. Each morning brought more concerns: the crown's debts, secret alliances, a court thick with flatterers. He had never sought the position of the king's hand, but King Robert Baratheon had insisted, and so here he was, tangled in the southern politics he despised. He finished reading the newly arrived Raven's scroll and felt a chill coil through his gut. It was Bran's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. Ned knew his second youngest son had suffered unimaginable trauma in that fall from the tower. And he knew Bran sometimes spoke of strange dreams that troubled him. But this letter was unlike anything Ned had read before. The words burned into his mind. They seek your downfall and trust none but those you are sure of. For several moments Ned stared at the parchment, hands gripping its edges so tightly that the paper nearly tore. He remembered Catelyn's whispered anxieties about the Lannisters after Bran's accident, or attempted murder, as she called it. Had the Lannisters truly tried to kill his boy? Ned had never been able to prove anything conclusive, yet the suspicion lingered. And now this message from Bran all but confirmed foul play in the capital. He read the lines about the king's hunt, a boar, blood. It was so specific and so dire. Ned had promised Catelyn he would watch over the king, but Robert was no easy man to sway. These hunts were among the few pleasures he had left, and Ned knew the king would bristle at the slightest sign of coddling. Yet, if his own son had glimpsed something in a dream or a vision, if that were truly possible, Ned could not ignore it. Not when every instinct told him that things were amiss here in King's Landing. He folded the parchment carefully, slipping it into the pocket of his doublet. Bran's letter might sound mad to others, but for Ned, the weight of it was real. He recalled, with a pang, how sometimes the northern families spoke in hushed tones about the old gifts. The children of the forest and the Greenseers, legends all, or so he had believed. But could it be that Bran was touched by some deeper magic? A father's heart was quick to fear for his child, but also quick to trust him, if that trust might save him. Ned was not certain how best to act, but he knew one thing: any misstep in King's Landing could be fatal. He would be more circumspect in his dealings. He would not rush to confrontation. But he would keep his sword sharp, his eyes open, and perhaps deliver a few small tests to confirm or disprove the forewarnings. Before the sun rose fully, Ned dressed in somber grays, ignoring the more lavish attire that tradition demanded of the hand of the king. He did not feel like a grand lord these days. Outside, the halls echoed with footsteps of guards changing shift. King's Landing woke early to the stench of Tanner's quarters and the clamor of 1,000 tongues. He summoned Jory Castle, his captain of the guard, who stood at attention by the door. Jory took in his lord's grave expression, saying nothing as Ned strode toward him and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Jory," Ned said quietly, "I have reason to believe I'm in greater danger than I first suspected. From now on, I want you, and a trusted handful of our men, to keep close watch on the Lannister guards, and the city watch as well. Pay special attention to Commander Janos Slynt and the gold cloaks he commands. See who they meet with, where they go. But do it discreetly. No one must suspect we're looking." "Nay." Jory's brow creased in concern, but he nodded. "Eh, my lord, discreet. Shall I double your guard as well?" Ned considered for a moment. "Yes, but not openly. If I draw attention, it might escalate. And Jory, another thing. I've received word, dire warnings about the king's upcoming hunt. I mean to speak to his grace about caution." "Niwat shall." The captain's eyes flicked to Ned's pocket, where the corner of Bran's letter peeked out. "You think it's so serious, my lord?" Ned's voice came quieter still. It might be worse than we can guess. I will not risk my family or the king, if I can help it. Jory nodded gravely, setting off to carry out his instructions. Ned watched him go, then turned to gaze out the window at the city below. Sunlight glinted off the red-tiled roofs, and the dawn sky was a mix of gold and pale blue, as though it could not decide whether it was day or night. He closed his eyes and recalled Bran as he used to be, bright-eyed, climbing everything in sight, determined to become a knight one day. The memory tugged at Ned's heart, but he banished his sorrow. One step at a time, he told himself. For now, he would keep his counsel, observe, and protect the king if he could. And if the conspirators had truly set their sights on him, they might soon discover that the North had sharper teeth than they ever expected. Lord Stark, King Robert said, voice echoing in the vaulted throne room, you look like you've swallowed a sour grape. Sit. You will eat something. This business of governance can wait. Nay, why? Robert Baratheon was a man grown soft around the middle, with a lust for good wine and roasted boar, but there was still a vestige of the mighty warrior he had once been. His presence was undeniable, a bear of a man with boisterous laughter and a handshake that could rattle bones. The gold of his crown seemed almost dwarfed by his tangled black hair. Ned walked up the steps to the Iron Throne, though Robert had chosen, as he often did, to stand before it rather than sit. The king's voice was not quite as thunderous as usual. Perhaps last night's wine still churned in his stomach. The throne room was otherwise quiet, only a few guards posted at intervals. I would gladly break my fast with you, your grace, Ned said, inclining his head. But I must speak with you about your hunt. The king's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Ah, the boar hunt? Well, if you've come to plead I take fewer men, you're too late. I want that beast cornered in the king's wood, and I want to spear it myself. He gave a little laugh. I keep telling you, Ned, don't fret. I can still handle a damned pig in the forest. Ned's face remained solemn. It's not just that. If you value my counsel, I urge you to be vigilant. Robert's good humor waned slightly. What's this about? There's reason to believe, Ned began carefully, that forces might be conspiring to put you at risk when you are beyond these walls. I've heard unsettling rumors that the Lannisters are maneuvering for more power. If your hunt is poorly guarded, you could be in danger. There was a beat of silence, broken only by the distant scrape of a guard's boot. Robert studied Ned's face with narrowed eyes, the way one man might study another over a card table. For an instant, Ned thought the king might dismiss him outright, but Robert's gaze softened. Gods be good, Ned, you sound like my mother, though I know you mean it. Conspiring, you say? The king's voice dropped, as if the mention of his queen's family forced him to weigh his next words. Cersei has been cold as of late. But do you honestly believe she'd stoop to murder? And of me, her king? Ned hesitated. He had not openly accused the queen or her kin. He had no proof. Only the letter from Bran and his own suspicions. But that look on Robert's face, part fear, part anger, told Ned that the king suspected much already. Perhaps Robert had seen the Lannister ambition in glimpses, but chose to ignore it for the sake of peace or convenience. I cannot say for certain, your grace, Ned said, choosing his words. But the Lannisters put their own blood first. If they think you stand in the way of their advancement, you must be cautious. Delay the hunt until we know more, or take a larger guard. Robert was silent, his meaty hands fiddling with the buckle of his sword belt. Then he let out a gusty sigh. Cersei's father Tywin has half the realm's gold, and my damned councils keep telling me I owe him a fortune. If I show fear now. He shook his head. But I trust you more than these others. Fine. I'll take an escort of my best knights, more than usual. We leave in 2 days. You'll come with me, of course. Ned bowed. If that is your wish, your grace. You're damned right it is. If there's treachery afoot, I'd rather my old friend's sword be close by. Robert slapped Ned's shoulder affectionately, though a hint of unease marred the king's dark blue eyes. We'll get that boar, Ned, and we'll return to feast on it, alive and well. Ned mustered a small smile, though something about Bran's words kept nagging at him. A boar. Blood. Blood. A mortal wound. He prayed this new caution would be enough to avert that vision. Outside the throne room, Littlefinger awaited with a polite, knowing smile. Petyr Baelish looked casual in his finery, hands clasped behind his back, as if he had been standing there purely by coincidence. "My Lord Hand," he said smoothly, stepping forward. "What a pleasure to see you up so early. How fares our noble king?" Ned's eyes flicked over him, keen and measuring. "He's well enough. I'm afraid I haven't time for chatter, Petyr." Littlefinger's lips curved in a smirk. "If I required your time, I'd have scheduled a meeting. I simply wanted to extend a small courtesy. Word in the city is that the Gold Cloaks have been busy? Perhaps searching for something. You do like to keep secrets, my lord." No, dear. Ned's heart constricted. Had Petyr noticed Jory's men sniffing around already? That was too quick. Or perhaps it was mere guesswork, or an attempt to glean more information. Baelish had a knack for fishing in troubled waters. "I prefer honesty to secrets," Ned replied curtly. Littlefinger gave a slight bow. "Of course you do. You're Ned Stark. But please, allow me to offer a free piece of advice. King's Landing does not share your sense of honor. It's best to sheathe that northern bluntness in a glove of subtlety, or you may lose more than you realize." "Nemond House. And what do you stand to lose, Lord Baelish?" "Me?" Baelish smiled, stepping away with a flourish. "I've already lost what mattered to me a long time ago." He offered no further explanation, only turned and walked away, the click of his boots echoing on the marble floor. Ned watched him go, thinking how intangible alliances were in this nest of snakes. At every corner, someone was eavesdropping, someone was making a note, someone was gathering secrets to twist into a dagger. As Ned made his way back to the Tower of the Hand, he promised himself that, for the sake of his children, of all his children, he would not let the vipers in the south destroy House Stark. Bran's letter had set him on guard, and that guard would remain up until he uncovered the truth. Back in Winterfell, Bran waited, day after long day, for a raven in return. But none came. He questioned Maester Luwin daily, anxiety knotting in his chest. Each morning he arose, half expecting some sign that the future had altered or that some catastrophe had befallen his father. He grew restless, demanding to be carried from room to room, taking refuge in the Godswood or on the battlements where the wind whipped at his hair. Sometimes, he found a measure of calm with Rickon, his younger brother who was too small to understand the weight of what Bran felt. Sometimes he listened to the wise counsel of Maester Luwin, who assured him that Lord Eddard Stark was prudent and vigilant. But deep in Bran's heart, he sensed that the turning of events was swift and dangerous, like a river in flood. He tried again to glimpse the future at night, though he could not control these visions. They came unbidden, or not at all. When they did come, he saw pieces of a puzzle, some reassuring, some worse than before. Once, he dreamt of the king's banner, stag on a field of gold, stained in blood. Another time he saw a sword glimmering with rubies, a lion roaring. He wondered if the pieces formed a tapestry of war. One morning he woke with a single desperate thought. If only I could speak to my father in person. If only I could show him. But he was trapped here, hundreds of leagues to the north, and he might never walk or ride as he once did. So he breathed deep, telling himself that he had done all he could. He had warned his father. The rest was in the hands of the old gods if they were listening. He clung to hope that his vision had changed the course of events, that Ned Stark was now aware, vigilant, and prepared. But destiny was a shadow with many shapes, and the future was not so easily tamed. The wind swept through the Kingswood, rustling branches and stirring the earthy scent of leaves and soil. The royal hunting party rode in a loose formation, bright cloaks and polished armor catching the scattered beams of sunlight. Hounds bayed, and horns sounded sporadically, echoing among the ancient trees. Robert Baratheon, spear in hand, led them. Beside him rode Ned Stark, as well as Sir Barristan Selmy, Renly Baratheon, and a handful of other knights that Robert trusted. The king's squire, Lancel Lannister, trailed behind on a smaller horse, carrying a wineskin and looking altogether too eager to please. The rest of the party was strung out in pairs, some leading the hounds, some scouting ahead for signs of boar. Ned glanced around warily. He had convinced Robert to bring more knights than usual, 12 in total, and Jory Castle had personally picked some capable men to ride discreetly behind. Robert had complained about the fuss, but ultimately relented. And so far, the hunt had proceeded without incident, though they had caught no sight of the boar they sought. Ned's eyes kept flicking to the tree lines, searching for hidden threats. King Robert was in high spirits, hollering jokes and leaning over to whack Renly on the shoulder. "Hear that, brother? That's the cry of a boar in rut. We'll corner the beast soon enough." Renly forced a grin, though he glanced at Ned and Sir Barristan as if uncertain. "Yes, brother, soon enough." Ned guided his mount closer to the king. "Your Grace, I advise caution. A cornered boar is more dangerous than a cornered man. Let Sir Barristan flush it out, then." "Bah," Robert scoffed. "You're as grim as ever, Ned. Isn't there any of the old fire left in you? I recall a time when we stood side by side against the Targaryens' best." "Nay." Ned bowed his head slightly, letting Robert have his pride. "You were fearless then, and you remain fearless now. I only mean to keep you alive, my friend." Robert grunted in amused acceptance. Then, with surprising agility for a man of his size, he spurred his horse forward. The hunting party followed his lead, weaving through the underbrush. The horns sounded again. Shouts from the outriders indicated they'd picked up the trail of a large boar. Robert roared with excitement, urging his men to press on. A prickle of tension ran down Ned's spine. His knuckles whitened around the reins. This was the moment he had feared. The boar cornered in some shady patch of brambles, the king dismounting with spear in hand. In Bran's letter, the boar had gored Robert in a vision. Ned had done all he could to prevent that. He prayed it would be enough. A shout echoed from ahead. "Your Grace, we've got it cornered." Robert let out a triumphant holler and kicked his horse into a gallop, Sir Barristan and Renly flanking him. Ned and the rest followed, entering a clearing strewn with fallen logs and thick brambles. There, indeed, stood a monstrous boar, snorting and pawing the ground. Its hide was thick, bristling with coarse hair, tusks gleaming like daggers. The hounds barked and circled, but kept their distance. "Ah, there you are, old friend," Robert said with a wolfish grin, reining in a few dozen paces away. "Big bastard, aren't you?" He tossed the reins to Lancel, who had dismounted to hold the king's horse. Sir Barristan moved to dismount as well. "Your Grace, allow me to engage first." "No," Robert said. "This one's mine." "Robert, please," Ned interjected urgently, dismounting. "Let Sir Barristan strike the initial blow. We can." But the king was already on foot, brandishing his spear. His eyes gleamed with the old spirit, as if for a moment he were the Robert Baratheon of the Trident once again. Unstoppable, a warhammer in hand. Only now, it was a spear and a wild boar, and the king carried extra weight around his middle that slowed him. Renly glanced at Ned, fear flickering in his eyes. They both stepped forward, but Robert waved them off. "Stay back. This is between me and the beast. A king should be able to kill his own dinner." He strode toward the boar, his boots crunching on twigs. The boar lowered its head, letting out a guttural snort. Then, with startling speed, it charged. Robert braced, crouching low, spear angled. At the last second, he lunged, driving the spear toward the creature's flank. For a moment, time seemed to hang in midair. Then the boar twisted, letting out an enraged squeal as the spearhead bit into its flesh, but not deep enough. Its tusks came up, slashing at Robert's side. The king stumbled with a roar of pain, blood staining his hunting leathers. Ned rushed forward, sword drawn. Sir Barristan was already in motion, intercepting the boar's next charge, his blade flashing. With a precise thrust, he hamstrung the beast. It went down thrashing, squealing in fury. Barristan ended its suffering with a swift stroke. Renly scrambled to Robert's side. "Gods, Robert! You're hurt." The king's face was contorted in pain, and when Ned reached him, he saw the gash was wide and bloody across his ribs, but it had not disemboweled him. The wound was serious, though perhaps not immediately fatal, if tended swiftly. "Damn, boar," Robert muttered through gritted teeth, his breath ragged. "I almost had him. 7 hells." Ned pressed a hand to the king's side, staunching the bleeding. "We need to get you back to the castle, now. Where's the carriage? Where's the litter?" Lancel rushed up, pale as milk. I'll fetch the supplies." "Wine for the pain?" "Not yet." "Hey," Robert groaned, then hissed as Ned and Barristan helped him stand. "No, wait. Screw the wine. Just dip me back." They half-carried, half-walked the king to a makeshift litter that some of the men quickly fashioned from saplings and a cloak. Robert's features were pallid, and each breath made him wince. Still, he managed to glare at Ned. "You were right. Damn your cold northern caution. Maybe I am getting old." Ned forced a tight smile, relief mingling with dread. "Even the strongest warrior can be brought low by a wild beast, your grace. The question is whether we can keep you from taking fever or infection. You'll be riding again before long, if the gods are good." Nilvan, Eldar. Despite the pain, Robert let out a gruff laugh. "We'll see if they are." They carried him out of the clearing, leaving the dead boar behind. In the hush of the forest, Ned felt his heart pound. The crucial difference was that the king was still breathing, still alive. Bran's warning had not gone unheeded. If they could get Robert to a skilled maester in time, he might survive what, in another future, would have been a mortal wound. As they made their way back, the men's anxious murmurs and the king's ragged breathing filled Ned's ears. He suspected the real danger would come once they returned to the Red Keep. If the Lannisters were part of a conspiracy, they might attempt to finish what the boar had started. But at least now he knew to watch for it. Sweat trickled down Ned's brow as they maneuvered the litter carefully through the undergrowth. The godswood in Winterfell seemed very far away, but Ned silently thanked the old gods and the new for this small reprieve. So far, the vision was changed. Robert's life hung in the balance, but it was not lost. There was a chance that this time, House Stark would not be forced to watch the realm implode in blood and betrayal. He prayed Bran's warning would continue to echo through his every decision. Under Grand Maester Pycelle's supervision, Robert Baratheon was brought to his bedchamber and carefully stitched and bandaged. The wound across his ribs was deep, but not puncturing vital organs. He would suffer from fever, no doubt, and the healing would be slow. Pycelle fussed with potions, preaching about bed rest and the wonders of milk of the poppy. Cersei Lannister hovered by the bedside, her face a mask of constrained fury and worry. Joffrey, standing behind her, tried to keep a regal bearing, though he looked pale at the sight of his father's blood. The queen said little, but her eyes snapped at Ned like a cornered lioness. When Robert finally awoke properly and was lucid enough to speak, Ned was there, along with the queen, Sir Barristan and Pycelle. Robert's voice was weak, but he managed a gruff command. "Leave us, except Ned. I want words alone with my hand." "Nano command, Manamo." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "Your grace, you're still recovering. Surely." "Woman," I said. "Leave us," Robert barked, though it came out less forceful than intended. Cersei's expression flickered with anger, but she schooled it behind a cool mask. She beckoned for Joffrey and Pycelle to follow, then swept from the room. Only Ned remained by the king's bedside. Robert studied him through half-lidded eyes. "Ned, my friend, you saved my life, or tried to. If not for your meddling, I might have gone alone with fewer men. That boar could have ripped me open. Maybe I owe you my life." "Nani?" Ned inclined his head, voice quiet. "Any man of honor would do the same, your grace. Then consider yourself more than my hand. Consider yourself a brother." He tried to laugh, but it turned into a grimace of pain. "I suppose I already did. Anyway, I want you to watch out for me until I'm on my feet again. You must hold the realm together. If anything happens, if my condition worsens—" He coughed, wincing again. Ned poured him a cup of water from a pitcher on the bedside table, helping him sip. "You need rest, your grace. Don't tax yourself with anxious thoughts." "No." Robert's big hand clasped Ned's wrist. "I know you, Ned. You've always been too honest. You suspect something. Someone. I see it in your eyes. Tell me plainly. Do you believe the Lannisters had a hand in this?" Ned considered carefully. He had no proof of direct sabotage, but he believed wholeheartedly that if Robert had gone out with fewer guards, the outcome might have been fatal. "I cannot say how or when, but I do believe the Lannisters conspire, yes. Perhaps not always in unison, but they seek greater power. Your accident in the woods may have been simply that, an accident, but it fits all too well with their desires." "But—" Robert lay back, looking up at the bed's canopy. His breath came heavily, rattling slightly. I was a fool to dismiss your warnings. My pride nearly killed me." He frowned. "Joffrey is not the boy I'd hoped he would be. Cersei is cunning, and her kin are fierce as wolves in defense of their own. You must watch them, Ned. Promise me that." "No. I promise, your grace." "Good. That's good." Robert's eyes drifted shut, sweat beading on his brow. He squeezed Ned's arm with surprising force, then let go, sinking into exhausted slumber. Ned stayed a while, ensuring the king's breathing was steady, then quietly stepped out into the corridor. Sir Barristan was there, standing guard, face etched with concern. Ned nodded, reassuring him as best he could, then made his way down the hall. No sooner had he turned the corner than he found Queen Cersei waiting, hands folded before her. The corridor was empty except for 2 Lannister guards posted at a distance. "Lord Stark," she said coolly, voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "What an eventful day." He inclined his head stiffly. "Your Grace, I trust you are relieved the king survived." Her eyes narrowed, though her lips curved in a faint smile. "Of course, my husband's continued health ensures the stability of the realm and the prosperity of our house." She took a step forward, her emerald eyes boring into Ned's. "I hope you do not believe we had any hand in this accident." Ned was silent for a long beat. "I believe many things, your grace, but I offer no accusations without proof." Cersei's gaze flicked to the door behind which Robert lay. "You're an honorable man, Lord Stark. That honor may serve you well among simple folk. Here in King's Landing it can be a weakness if you misstep." He recognized the warning behind her words. "I've heard such suggestions before from others. I do not intend to misstep, nor do I intend to let conspirators harm my king." She maintained her composure, though the tension was palpable. "Then we both desire the same outcome." She inclined her head. "Good day to you, my lord." With that, she turned, her guards falling in step behind her, and left Ned alone in the corridor. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the capital's intrigues pressing down on him. He touched the pocket of his doublet, where he still kept Bran's letter. In that moment, he silently thanked his son's warning once again. If not for Bran, Robert might already be dead. That would have meant the ascendancy of Joffrey, a boy raised by the Lannisters, and a realm in chaos, no doubt culminating in Ned's own downfall. But fate had shifted, at least for now. Over the next few days, the king's condition stabilized. He was weak, but not dying. The court hummed with rumors. Some said the king had grown infirm, that he was no longer fit to rule. Others blamed the boar hunt on Ned Stark's northern gloom. Varys the Spider whispered that more cunning heads should prevail, while Littlefinger tried to placate both sides without revealing his own hand. The queen maintained a public appearance of relief, yet behind closed doors her patience thinned. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, had returned to the capital to ensure the king's safety, though many suspected his presence was less about loyalty to Robert and more about protecting his sister's interests. All the while, Ned continued to quietly investigate the Lannisters' doings. He discovered that City Watch officers had received bribes from unknown sources, possibly to shift their allegiance if a power play emerged. He uncovered hints that Petyr Baelish was placing bets on every side. He found more pieces of the puzzle surrounding Joffrey's parentage, reading through the lineage of House Baratheon, and finding that not a single Baratheon child in recorded history had ever borne the golden hair of the Lannisters. It all pointed to one terrible truth: Joffrey was not Robert's son. In the original timeline that Bran had glimpsed, Ned's confrontation with Cersei might have led to his imprisonment or worse. But this time, forewarned, Ned moved more carefully. Rather than confronting Cersei privately with the truth, he considered how best to ensure success. If Robert discovered that Joffrey was not his, it could tear the realm apart. Yet, allowing a bastard, one sired by Jaime Lannister, to ascend the throne would mean war just as surely. He knew, sooner or later Robert must be told, but he wanted evidence so irrefutable that the king's anger would not be turned against him. The risk was great. The only advantage Ned possessed was that the Lannisters believed his first concern was the king's immediate health, not the royal succession. As he sat in his solar one evening, gazing at a candle's flickering flame, he thought again of Bran. His son's letter had saved Robert's life, at least for now. If he could likewise save the realm from an illegitimate heir, Perhaps the war that loomed in his nightmares could be averted. He penned a coded message to Catelyn, urging her to keep Winterfell secure and to prepare for trouble. He wished he could promise that all would be well, but that was impossible. Too many dice had been cast. In the corridor outside, the torches guttered. Ned closed his eyes, clasping his hands before him, thinking of all he stood to lose if he failed, and all that might be won if he succeeded. Ned did not sleep well that night. He found himself in the God's Wood of Winterfell in a dream, the heart tree's red eyes dripping tears of sap. Dia. Through the stillness, he heard Bran's voice, faint as a breeze among the leaves. If you do not act with certainty, father, you will lose everything. He awoke at dawn, sweat cold on his brow. Within the hour he was in Robert's solar. The king sat propped in a chair near the window, still pale but defiant. An untouched platter of food lay on the table beside him. Robert beckoned him in. Close the door. Ned obeyed, noticing the tension in the king's posture. I'm told you've been investigating the Lannisters, Ned, digging into their finances, their connections in the City Watch. You've been reading books on lineages? Robert regarded him with tired eyes. Why? There it was, the question Ned had both dreaded and anticipated. He drew a breath. Because you placed the welfare of the realm in my hands, your grace. I suspect the Lannisters plan to secure their hold on the throne if you were to die. We are in grave danger if we don't address it. Robert's jaw tightened. Speak plainly, Ned. You think they'll try to usurp me? Ned met Robert's gaze steadily. I fear they've already begun by placing a false heir in line for your throne. The king's face twisted. Explain. Ned recounted the details. The hair color, the lineage, the improbability that any Baratheon child would be anything but black of hair. The rumors about Jaime and Cersei. His tone was even, but inside he felt a tumult of nerves. This was the hardest truth to speak. Robert listened, anger growing in his eyes, hands clenched into fists. When Ned finished, the king smashed a goblet off the table, sending wine splattering across the floor. Gods damn her, Robert hissed. I always suspected. I knew she never loved me. But Jaime's child. My father's father would spit in his grave. He staggered to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. Ned moved to support him, but Robert brushed him away. The king's face was consumed by fury. Bastard-born filth, he growled. She has made a mockery of my bloodline. The realm, our realm. He drew a ragged breath, turning wild eyes to Ned. Who else knows? Lord Baelish may suspect. Lord Varys too, I'd wager. Perhaps others in the Queen's circle. It's uncertain. Robert slammed a fist onto the table. Then we must act swiftly. I'll not have that whelp Joffrey inherit my throne. He swallowed hard, voice shaking with rage. We must name my rightful heir, Stannis. He's my brother, the next in line, or Renly. But Stannis is older, so yes, Stannis. He's humorless, but he's just. He'll keep the realm in line. Ned nodded, relieved that Robert understood the stakes. We must proceed carefully, your grace. Cersei and Jaime will not take this lightly. The gold cloaks might side with her if we move too brashly. Nay. Damn the gold cloaks, Robert snarled, but then sank back into his seat, clutching at his bandaged ribs. Pain contorted his face. I can't lead the charge myself, not with these stitches in me. This is your fight, Ned, or you and the men you trust. Barristan Jory, whoever. Root out the Lannister threat. Arrest Jaime if you must. Cersei too, though He swallowed, eyes clouding for an instant. We had 3 children, or so I thought. My children, what does that make them now? Ned bowed his head. They are innocents in the sense that they played no part in their parentage, but they have no claim to the throne. Robert waved a hand in frustration. I'll not have them killed if that's what the realm might demand. They're children. But they can't stay here. They must be exiled or something. Just keep them away from the throne. Ned nodded, relief blossoming. He had feared Robert's wrath might lead him to call for the children's executions, but the king was no child killer. We'll do what must be done to preserve the line of succession. Your grace, do I have your leave to gather men loyal to you and to the realm, and prepare to act? Now and the king squeezed his eyes shut, nodding. Yes, do it. Before I lose my nerve or before I bleed out. Enough talk, Ned. We must strike. Ned rose, heart pounding. He remembered the dream voice, telling him to act with certainty. This was the time. Yes, Your Grace. Outside, the corridor felt close and oppressive. Ned saw Sir Barristan waiting at a discreet distance. He motioned the knight closer, lowering his voice. You have served the realm loyally for decades, Sir Barristan. Will you continue to do so, even if we must oppose the Queen's family? Oh. Barristan Selmy's lined face reflected sorrow, but his voice was firm. I have sworn to serve the king and the realm, always. Ned nodded. Then gather the king's guard you trust, and the men I brought from Winterfell. We move quietly but swiftly. The city watch may be compromised, so let us rely on those we know. We must place the queen and the royal children under guard, safely. No harm is to come to them, but they cannot remain free to seize power. Barristan's shoulders squared. As you command, Lord Stark. Ned placed a hand on the knight's shoulder. I pray this can be done without bloodshed. Barristan's silence said it all. In King's Landing, bloodshed often lurked behind every corner. That evening, Ned Stark, Sir Barristan, and a contingent of loyal men made their move. The king remained in his chambers, ironically safer wounded and bedridden than he would have been wandering the halls. Messengers were sent out to discreetly notify certain lords and knights of Robert's command. Jory Castle and his men secured key passages in the Red Keep. The intention was not to slaughter the Queen's men but to isolate them. The moment the Gold Cloaks realized something was amiss, swords would likely be drawn. As they approached the royal apartments where Cersei and her children resided, Ned's heart thudded like a drum in his chest. He felt the memory of Bran's letter, the impetus that had led him here, shaping fate like clay on a potter's wheel. This was the juncture. If they succeeded, House Stark might avert the cataclysm that had seemed inevitable. If they failed, it would be open war. A cluster of Lannister guards stood at the far end of the corridor, their crimson cloaks pooling in the torchlight. When they spotted the armed men approaching, they stiffened, hands going to sword hilts. Halt! One guard stepped forward. What is the meaning of this? Ned stepped ahead of his men, voice calm. By order of King Robert Baratheon, we are to escort the Queen and the royal children to secure chambers. The guard's eyes flicked uncertainly to Sir Barristan, who nodded gravely. His Grace's orders, Barristan said. Before the Lannisters could respond, Jaime Lannister appeared from a side door, clad in gleaming gold armor. His green eyes gleamed with challenge, that lazy smirk curling his lips. My, is the king so bored that he's sending half his men to babysit the Queen? Sir Jaime, Ned said, keeping his voice low. Stand aside. Jaime tilted his head, voice mocking. And if I don't? Behind Ned, steel rasped as some of his men drew swords. Sir Barristan's posture tensed. Ned held up a hand, trying to prevent violence. This need not come to bloodshed, Ned said. The king has commanded that the Queen and her children be kept under guard until matters of succession are clarified. Jaime snorted. Succession. Are we dethroning Robert while he's bedridden, or is he dethroning himself? That is enough, Sir Barristan snapped, stepping forward. Out of respect for the oath you once swore to protect the king, do not force us to fight you. Jaime let out a short laugh. Barristan, always so dutiful. I see. You think to place my sister under lock and key at the word of a wounded drunk who might not last another fortnight. His grin soured. I can't let that happen. I won't. Ned sensed the tension escalating. He eyed the Lannister men behind Jaime, each gripping a spear or sword. On Ned's side, Jory and the others readied themselves. It was a hair's breadth from violence. It is the king's order, Ned said coldly. Do not defy your king. Jaime's smirk flickered, replaced by something fierce. The king, right. He drew his sword, Valyrian steel glinting in the torchlight. The corridor was thick with men, no room to maneuver easily. Jaime's stance was poised, lethal. Sir Barristan drew his blade. Don't do this, Kingslayer. For a moment it seemed inevitable that blood would be shed, that the corridor would erupt in steel and screams. Then a clear, commanding voice broke through. Jaime! All heads turned to see the queen herself, Cersei Lannister, standing in the threshold of the royal chambers. She wore a long gown of emerald silk, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. Her expression was taut with anger, but a flicker of fear danced in her eyes. Behind her, Joffrey and Myrcella hovered anxiously. Tommen was nowhere to be seen, likely in a different chamber. Jaime glanced at Cersei, sword half lowered. "They come to imprison you, sister. You'd have me stand aside?" Cersei surveyed the scene, taking in the ranks of men. She recognized the presence of Ser Barristan and the unwavering resolve in Ned Stark's eyes. Though her lips curled with disdain, she gestured Jaime to hold. "No, put up your sword, for now." Jaime hesitated, knuckles whitening on the hilt. Then, with visible reluctance, he reversed the blade and slid it back into its sheath. He turned away sharply, as if disgusted. Ned motioned for his men to move in. Cersei remained composed, though her complexion was pale. "You claim to act on Robert's orders," she said, voice cold. "If that is truly so, you can be sure he will hear of this." Ned inclined his head. "He is the one who commanded it, Your Grace." Her eyes flickered with hatred. She glanced at Jaime, then back at Ned. "I hope you know, Lord Stark, that this is an act of war." "Not if we can avoid it," Ned replied. "The king desires no harm to you or your children, only that you do not seize power while he is incapacitated." Cersei's gaze darted to Joffrey, who stood behind her, trembling in a mixture of rage and confusion. "Joffrey is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne," she said, voice quivering with barely contained fury. "This is treason." Ned's face was etched in grim lines. "We shall let the realm and the king decide that." And so, under watchful guard, the queen and her children were escorted to secure chambers. Jaime Lannister, outnumbered, was forced to remain under house arrest in adjoining quarters. The Lannister men were disarmed or stationed where they could cause no trouble. Ned Stark felt no triumph in it, only relief mixed with a sense of dread, for the next steps would be even more perilous. The realm stood on a knife's edge. But at least for now, they had a chance to resolve the question of succession without the king's death, plunging them into chaos. Word spread through King's Landing as swiftly as a brush fire in drought. The queen and her children were confined under the king's direct orders. Jaime Lannister was effectively a captive as well. The Lannister forces scattered throughout the city, fumed and muttered curses, but with Robert still alive, they hesitated to openly rebel. In the Red Keep's council chamber, Ned Stark convened a gathering of the remaining loyal counselors, Renly Baratheon, who had returned to stand by his brother's side, Ser Barristan Selmy, representing the Kingsguard, Varys, the Master of Whisperers, who glided in with an expression of mild curiosity, and Petyr Baelish, who watched the proceedings with a calculating smile. Grand Maester Pycelle was absent, tending to the king's wound, or so he claimed. Renly paced near the table, every so often glancing toward the doors. "Stannis should be summoned," he said, agitation clear in his voice. "If my brother acknowledges that Joffrey is not his son, then Stannis must be told at once." Ned nodded. "A raven has been dispatched to Dragonstone." Varys steepled his fingers, speaking gently. "And what of poor Cersei, locked away like a common criminal? Gossip says she is furious, but has made no attempt to break free. Curious, wouldn't you say?" Littlefinger cleared his throat. "Perhaps the queen awaits reinforcements. Lord Tywin commands vast armies in the west after all. If he marches south, the city could be put to siege." "That is a risk," Ned agreed. "Hence the importance of a swift resolution. Once the king recovers enough to hold open court and proclaim Stannis as heir, we hope the realm will accept the rightful succession." "Hope," Petyr echoed softly. "A fragile shield." Renly looked ready to explode with frustration. "We can't just stand here while Tywin Lannister raises an army. We must prepare. Muster forces loyal to the crown. Mace Tyrell and Highgarden might—" "We should not ignite a war if it can be avoided," Ned said firmly. "Even Lord Tywin might hesitate to march against a living king who clearly denounces his grandchildren's claim." "That depends on his pride," said Varys, voice dripping with irony. "Tywin Lannister is not known for humility." A silence fell over them, broken only by Renly's restless pacing. Petyr Baelish finally spoke up, arms folded. All of this might be moot if King Robert's wound festers. He could die, and once he does, however questionable, Joffrey might declare himself king. If the gold cloaks shift their allegiance, Ned's eyes flared. Have you heard otherwise, that the gold cloaks would side with Joffrey? Littlefinger shrugged. Let's just say money can bend the loyalties of many, dear Lord Stark. You'd be wise to place men you trust in command. Ned already had, though he wouldn't say so aloud. He noted the sly way Petter watched him. Baelish was a game player, always wearing masks. The man claimed to want peace, but he thrived in chaos. Ned was aware that trusting him too fully would be a grave mistake. Yet he might prove useful if handled carefully. Regardless, the king has the final word, Ned said, steel in his voice. I won't discuss Joffrey's or Tommen's claim further until Robert himself can speak before the realm. Renly nodded, seeming to accept that for now. Varys offered a small bow. As you wish, my Lord Hand. Littlefinger's eyes flicked from face to face. I shall take my leave then. These are turbulent times, and I have much to attend to. He turned on his heel and departed, the echoes of his footsteps fading down the corridor. Ned glanced at Sir Barristan. How fares the king? The knight sighed. Better, though in pain. He tires quickly. Pycelle says he must remain abed for at least another week, maybe 2. Then we must hold the line until he can stand. Ned set his hands on the council table, bowing his head in a moment of silent reflection. Once, he had believed war was inevitable. Bran's visions had shown him no other path. But now they stood on the precipice of something new. If Robert survived, if Stannis was declared heir, perhaps it would not end in rivers of blood. Yet Ned knew better than to be complacent. Tywin Lannister might rally a host. The Gold Cloaks might switch sides if bribed. Even within the Red Keep, cunning minds might conspire to free the Queen or kill the king in his bed. Ned felt the enormity of it bearing down on him. But he would not shirk from his duty. For Bran's sake, for all his children, he would see it through. A day later, a tense hush enveloped the Red Keep as Lord Tywin Lannister's response arrived by Raven. Addressed to the king but opened by Ned, it was short and chilling. Tywin demanded the release of his daughter and grandchildren, threatening dire consequences should any harm befall them. He did not explicitly mention war, but the implication was plain. Cross House Lannister, and pay in blood. Ned read the letter aloud to Robert, who was propped up in bed, face drawn but determined. When Ned finished, the king snorted. Tywin has grown too accustomed to ruling through threats. He forgets that I'm not Aerys Targaryen to be cowed by the might of Casterly Rock. There will be bloodshed if we do not handle this carefully, Ned warned. Hell claim we're holding them hostage. Robert let out a humorless laugh. They are hostages in a sense. But I'm the king, and it was lawful. He pressed a hand to his side, wincing. I'll not release them until the realm understands what's happened with Joffrey's parentage. Once that is clear, perhaps we can negotiate their return. Under watch, to Casterly Rock or some other place. Tywin can rant all he wants, but he won't be so quick to risk open rebellion. Ned bowed his head. As you say, Your Grace. Robert exhaled slowly. Is everything in place for the announcement? Ned nodded. Yes. Tomorrow, we convene a gathering in the throne room. The major lords present in King's Landing will attend, as well as the small council. We'll have ample guard to ensure no violence. You can speak from the throne itself if you feel strong enough, or remain seated in front of it. Nay. Damn that throne, it's as prickly as its occupant, Robert muttered, managing a flicker of wry humor. I'll speak from a chair if need be, as long as the words are said. He paused, eyes drifting to the window where the sky was streaked with the pink of late afternoon. Nah, I'm in your debt. I realize that now. I always said you had a cursed sense of honor, but perhaps it saved us. If that boar had killed me, Joffrey would be king and the Lannisters, he trailed off. Ned stepped forward. Let's not dwell on what might have been. In his mind he saw a flash of Bran's dream, Ned kneeling before Joffrey, about to be executed. That future had been so close. He swallowed hard. We must focus on preserving the peace, if it can still be preserved. Robert nodded, a hint of gratitude in his weary eyes. For now, let us do that. Ned had offered a rare, small smile. Get some rest, Your Grace. Tomorrow will be a day long remembered in the annals of Westeros. No. The throne room was crowded with lords, knights, and courtiers, all drawn by the summons. The atmosphere buzzed with speculation, rumors swirling like flies around a corpse. The chatter hushed suddenly as the doors at the rear opened. King Robert entered, helped by Sir Barristan Selmy, with Ned Stark and Renly Baratheon close behind. The king wore a royal blue tunic embroidered with the crowned stag, though he limped slightly, each step betraying the hidden pain of his healing wound. A hush fell over the assembly. Robert made his way to the foot of the Iron Throne, then turned to face the gathered crowd. He rested heavily on the pommel of a sword for support. Ned stood at his side, eyes scanning for any sign of aggression. He spotted Tyrion Lannister in the crowd, newly arrived in the city, his mismatched eyes tracking every move with keen interest. But Jaime, Cersei, and the children were absent, confined under guard. Robert cleared his throat. His voice, once thunderous, came out lower but steady enough. Lords and ladies of Westeros, I stand before you wounded but alive, thanks to the intervention of my hand, Lord Stark, and others who prevented a grave accident on the hunt from becoming my death. I have learned much in recent days, revelations that strike to the heart of our monarchy. I must share them with you, for the sake of the realm. He drew a breath, wincing slightly, and continued. I have reason to believe that my supposed children with Queen Cersei are not in fact mine. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen may share the blood of House Lannister alone, sired by Sir Jaime Lannister, the Queen's own brother. No. A ripple of shock tore through the crowd, outraged murmurs and gasps. Some men shouted in disbelief, others in horror. Tyrion's face went stony. Petyr Baelish stood near the back, eyes glittering with amusement or alarm. Varys watched with unreadable composure. Robert pounded a fist on the base of the throne for silence. I know this is hard to swallow. I would have it otherwise, but the evidence is clear. The children's heritage cannot be that of Baratheon. I have confronted the Queen about it. She did not deny it. That was a slight stretch of the truth. She had certainly denied it in words, but her captivity and the evidence had left little doubt. Therefore, they cannot succeed me as heirs to the Iron Throne. Chaos erupted again. Lords shouted, treason, while others demanded proof, some clamoring for calm. Robert drew in another deep breath. By rights of succession I declare my brother Stannis Baratheon the rightful heir to the Iron Throne upon my death. He currently resides in Dragonstone, but he will return to King's Landing when summoned. Until such time I remain your king, and I will see that peace is maintained. Sparks of anger flew from some quarters, men presumably loyal to the Lannisters, or uncertain of the king's claim. Renly's posture tensed, but he stood resolute behind his brother. Ned scanned the crowd for any sign of an impending attack. The gold cloaks, under the command of a new officer Ned trusted, lined the walls, weapons ready. At length Robert raised his hand again, voice straining. Any who dispute this are free to present evidence, but slander of the crown will be answered. The Queen and her children remain under my protection, confined for their own safety until we can ensure a proper resolution. House Lannister is hereby ordered to remain in their strongholds until summoned. If Lord Tywin raises arms against the crown, he will be deemed a traitor. I hope it does not come to that. He sagged slightly, pain etched on his face, and Ned quickly stepped forward, raising a hand for order. His Grace has spoken. We stand at the cusp of great change. But let there be no doubt, the realm stands behind King Robert. That is all. Nay. With that, guards moved to escort the king away, for fear that the exertion might worsen his injury. The lords broke into frenzied murmuring, some scattering to corners to confer. Ned and Renly accompanied Robert back to his chambers, Barristan helping support him. Once the door closed, Robert exhaled shakily. It's done then. The dragon has been woken. Renly pressed a palm to his forehead. Stannis, do you truly intend to pass the crown to him, brother? If so, you should name him protector of the realm until you're well. Nay, no. Robert grimaced. Stannis is many things, but not a man to let this pass easily. He'll want to punish the Lannisters for their deceit. Ned, you must help me keep him from extremes. I will do my best, Ned said. We must also be prepared for Lord Tywin's reaction. We can't appear weak. The realm must see that the king stands firm." The king nodded, then slumped onto a chair, clutching at his side. "Gods, this wound is killing me. I need milk of the poppy." Renly fetched a small vial. Ned eased Robert into a more comfortable position, and the king gulped down the bitter draught. His eyelids grew heavy. Before his consciousness slipped away, Robert grasped Ned's wrist. "You did well, Ned. Tell me we've averted a war." Ned managed a hopeful smile. "We've given ourselves a chance to avoid it." Robert closed his eyes, drifting into a drugged slumber. Renly looked at Ned, expression fraught with worry. "A chance isn't a certainty." Ned placed a hand on the younger Baratheon's shoulder. "No, it isn't. But it's better than what awaited us otherwise." He thought of Bran, miles away in Winterfell, with his visions of Ned's downfall and the kingdom in flames. That future was no longer certain. Already the tapestry of fate was being rewoven, one thread at a time. They left Robert to his medicated rest, stepping out into the corridor. The Red Keep was alight with tension. Courtiers rushed back and forth, lords barked orders at their men. Rumor and speculation would run rampant through the city tonight. Some would doubt the king's claim, others would cheer that the Lannisters had been unmasked. The real test, though, would come in the days and weeks ahead, as the shockwave spread across the 7 kingdoms. Far away, in the quiet halls of Winterfell, Bran Stark awoke at dawn with his heart hammering in his chest. He had dreamt of a great golden lion roaring at the gates, only to be held at bay by a howling winter wind that froze its paws in place. Then he had seen a stag, limping but alive, stand triumphant on a hill as wolves howled at its side. He felt summer stir at his side, the dire wolf's soft whine of reassurance thrumming in the room's stillness. Bran pushed himself up, arms straining to lift his weakened lower body. Outside, the sky was a cold northern gray. But something in Bran's chest felt lighter, as if a burden had eased. He looked toward the doorway and saw Maester Luwin, who entered with a small lamp. The old man's expression seemed almost pleased. "Bran, good morning. I bring news. A raven arrived from King's Landing." Bran's pulse quickened. "Father? Is he all right?" Luwin nodded, unfolding the letter. "It appears your father is well, and King Robert yet lives. Changes are afoot in the capital, significant changes. The Queen and the Lannisters have been confronted regarding certain claims to the throne. For now, your father stands by the king." "No fees." Bran's eyes brimmed with tears of relief. He reached for the letter, scanning the words in Ned's precise hand. He read of the boar that nearly killed Robert, of the swift action that had saved him, and of the confrontation that followed. Though the letter contained no mention of Bran's warning dreams, Bran sensed their unspoken impact, as though each line of the letter pulsed with the aftershocks of his intervention. "So, the war may never begin?" Bran whispered. Luwin hesitated. "We cannot know the future. There is much unrest, but your father believes we have avoided the worst, or at least postponed it." The king himself wrote a small note attached, praising the loyalty and insight of House Stark. Bran sank against his pillows, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for days. Then he gazed at Summer, who tilted her head in that uncanny way, golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. A memory passed through Bran's mind, a vision of Ned Stark kneeling in the dust, sword at his neck. That future had flickered out. Now another path lay open, full of perils still, but not the same doom that had loomed so heavily before. He let himself smile, tears slipping down his cheeks. Perhaps he was just a boy, broken in body, haunted by strange dreams. Yet, with a single letter, he had changed the course of history. The knowledge of that power both frightened and awed him. He thought of the old gods, the weirwoods, the endless wind blowing through the north. Perhaps they had guided him, or perhaps he had done it alone. Either way, his father still lived. And the realm was not yet drowned in blood. The morning light crept across his chamber, illuminating Bran Stark's face. In his heart, he thanked whatever benevolent force had allowed him a glimpse of what might be, and the chance to avert it. Though winter was still coming, as it always did in the north, a spark of hope kindled in the darkness. And for the first time since his fall, Bran felt that the future might not be as cold and merciless as he once feared. Days passed, and the crown's decision reverberated throughout Westeros. Some lords grudgingly accepted the new reality, others seethed. Lord Tywin Lannister massed a host but did not immediately attack. He sent envoys demanding that his daughter and grandchildren be released, which the crown refused until the matter of the succession was fully settled. Stannis Baratheon sailed from Dragonstone, prepared to receive his appointment as heir, and the court braced for the collision of two proud men, Stannis and Robert, who rarely saw eye to eye. Yet, with Ned Stark mediating, there remained hope that they would find common ground for the sake of peace. Within the Red Keep, Cersei's fury burned hot, yet she found herself powerless under guard. Jaime Lannister was equally trapped, though at least he had some measure of freedom within the confined halls. The children, dismayed and confused, were treated humanely, spared from vengeance, as Robert had commanded. Conflict lingered like a storm cloud, but it had not yet broken into the destructive tempest that might have been. And all because, in Winterfell, a boy had dreamed of a future so terrible, he refused to let it happen. In the end, war was not entirely averted. There would be skirmishes, vendettas, fresh rivalries sparked by the dethroning of Joffrey. The seeds of discord had been sown over years, even decades, and pulling them out by the roots would prove no easy task. But the horrifying chain of events that once led to Ned Stark's beheading, to the War of the Five Kings, to countless lives lost, those had been derailed. King Robert's wound slowly healed. He reclaimed some measure of vigor, determined to hold the realm together long enough for Stannis to assume a stable inheritance. Ned remained at his side, offering the unwavering counsel of the North, guiding Robert away from the vices and complacency that had once threatened to undo him. Renly found roles for himself in the new order, forging alliances that might keep the Tyrells friendly. Tyrion Lannister, sensing the winds of change, distanced himself from Cersei's unyielding bitterness, and worked to find a place where his wit might serve the crown, perhaps as a diplomat with the Vale or the Riverlands. The realm did not transform overnight into a utopia. It remained a place of ambition, cruelty, and intrigue, but also of honor, courage, and hope. The Targaryen threat still stirred across the sea, and winter still crept toward them. Yet, for the moment, one terrible civil war had been averted. And in that fragile peace, new possibilities emerged. When Ned Stark finally returned to Winterfell months later, accompanying King Robert on a royal progress to demonstrate unity across the north, he found Bran waiting for him in the courtyard, propped in his specially fashioned saddle, with Hodor beside him. The boy beamed at his father. There was more caution in Ned's eyes, more lines etched into his face by the burdens of King's Landing, but also a kind of quiet contentment. He dismounted from his horse and embraced Bran gently. "You saved me," Ned whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved the realm from tearing itself apart. You and your dreams." Bran hugged his father in return, tears in his eyes. "I couldn't let you die," he whispered back. I couldn't." Ned's embrace tightened, and for a moment, they were simply father and son, bound by love that transcended the perils of the world. The winter wind blew around them, whistling through the ancient walls of Winterfell. But in the courtyard, under the pale northern sun, they found warmth in one another's presence. That night, as Bran gazed upon the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood, he murmured a silent prayer of thanks. Far to the south, the Game of Thrones continued, ever complex, but at least for once, the pieces had been played in a way that spared the realm from an even darker path. House Stark endured, King Robert lived, and the realm, wounded though it was, remained stitched together by a tenuous peace. Though none could say what storms the future might hold, this one victory, won through a boy's vision and a father's courage, would echo in the histories as the day Ned Stark did not kneel before an enemy's sword, but instead stood beside his king, living to guide the realm toward a safer dawn. And high above, in the silent watch of the northern sky, the old gods seemed to look on with patient, ancient approval, as if acknowledging that the wheel of fate could indeed be turned by the will of mortal hearts. Bran Stark woke before dawn and lay in silence beneath the thick furs of his bed, listening to the faint creaks and murmurs that always inhabited Winterfell at that hour. The old castle seemed to breathe around him, its stones steeped in centuries of Starks and stories, and though he was still young, he could almost feel the history in his bones. Occasionally, a gust of wind would rush across the battlements and swirl into the courtyard, producing a quiet rush that seemed like a sigh. Though whether from the gods' wood or from the old walls themselves, Bran could never truly tell. He used to wonder if the castle might speak to him one day, in the same manner as his dreams spoke to him. Now he understood that everything in the north had its own voice, its own silent language. Bran was stronger in his arms these days, able to pull himself upright more easily as he pushed back the furs and blinked against the dim bluish light of early morning. He had been dreaming again. Not the same nightmares that had once plagued him, the vision of his father kneeling before a golden-haired tyrant, or the swirl of steel and blood in the heart of King's Landing, but something new, more cryptic. He had seen an expanse of white, stretching as far as the eye could see. Snowdrifts, a vast plain of ice, and in the distance shapes that moved with eerie grace. A hush had fallen over the dream, broken only by the distant call of ravens. He still felt the chill clinging to his skin. He levered himself toward the edge of the bed, and there was Summer, his faithful direwolf, stepping forward on large paws to offer a reassuring lick at Bran's hand. Bran smiled. The wolf's presence grounded him. No matter how unsettling his dreams became, Summer was a tether to reality. With practiced motions, Bran swung himself into the harness that Maester Luwin and the castle's smiths had designed for him. Bit by bit, day by day, he'd gotten more adept at maneuvering his limp legs into place. He braced his hands on the edge of the headboard, strapped himself in, and took a moment to gather his thoughts. It had been months now since his father's safe returned to Winterfell, together with King Robert Baratheon and a retinue of courtiers on their royal progress to display unity throughout the north. That very return had signaled a shift in fate, a break from the darker path Bran had foreseen in his nightmares. Somehow the worst of the southern intrigues had been held at bay. For that, Bran was grateful beyond words. But he knew also that no single victory could banish every shadow. The storms of politics still churned, and whispers of conflict circulated across the Seven Kingdoms. Only so much could be contained by the king's direct intervention, especially when so many lords and ladies had their own private ambitions. Still, for now, the news from King's Landing was guardedly hopeful. Robert was mending. The realm recognized Stannis Baratheon as the future heir. And House Lannister was held in check, albeit resentfully, by the crown's show of strength. By the crown's show of strength! When Hodor came in to carry Bran to the hall, Bran allowed the friendly giant to lift him. He was used to insisting on independence, but the corridors were sometimes long, and the harness alone couldn't get him everywhere. As they moved through Winterfell's winding passages, Summer padded close at their side, nails clicking on the stone floor. Torches still sputtered from the night, their flames casting flickering shadows. At last they emerged into the great hall, where a few of the household servants were laying the earliest fires. The smell of soot and ash greeted Bran's nose, mingling with the faint promise of morning bread from the kitchens. He saw his father there, already awake despite the early hour. Lord Eddard Stark stood by a window slit, gazing out onto the courtyard as if he were reading the day's omens in the color of the sky. Upon hearing Hodor's heavy footsteps, he turned and offered Bran a wan smile. There was a quiet warmth in Ned Stark's eyes, edged with a gravity that rarely left him since his experiences in King's Landing. "You're up early," Ned said softly, and Hodor, smiling at the Lord of Winterfell, set Bran carefully in a chair at the long table. Summer settled on the floor by Bran's feet. Bran nodded. "I couldn't sleep. I had dreams again." He chose his words carefully, knowing how those dreams unsettled his father. "Not like before. Something else." Ned's face grew more solemn. "What did you see?" "It's hard to describe," Bran said, voice low. "Snow everywhere, deep and boundless. And shadows moving beyond sight, shapes that felt cold in a way I've never felt before." He hesitated, looking at his father's features. "I couldn't see exactly what they were." His father's jaw tightened. It was no secret that the older generations of Starks had always warned that the real threats come with the wind from the far north, not from the petty intrigues of southern lords. Yet for centuries the White Walkers had been considered a distant legend, a tale to frighten children. Still, with the rumors of unnatural things stirring beyond the wall, none of them could truly dismiss the possibility that something stirred in the far north. "It was just a dream," Ned said after a moment, though his voice lacked conviction. Bran glanced away. We changed what I saw in my first dream, he reminded softly. Because we paid attention, maybe we should pay attention to this too. Ned placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. We will, son. Then, as if to lighten the mood, he added, once you've broken your fast, come join me in the courtyard. The king will want to see all of us before he sets out on the next leg of his progress. Bran nodded, recalling that Robert intended to visit Torrhen's Square, and even the Stony Shore, where rumors had it that raiders occasionally tested the North's watch. The king was determined to prove he was healthy enough to travel, though everyone knew his boar-gouged side still bothered him. House Stark was expected to see him off in proper style before the royals headed west. Even if the immediate threat of civil war had been averted, they all understood that life in Westeros remained precarious. Perhaps that was all the more reason for such journeys. He ate a small meal of bread and honey while his father took his leave. Hodor lingered close by, humming to himself, big hands folded as if uncertain what to do. Bran pulled at the crust of his bread thoughtfully, letting summer have a taste, and tried to quell the swirl of nerves inside him. The old gods had shown him a vision once, and it saved countless lives. Now, they whispered something else in his sleep. He couldn't unravel it yet, but a sense of foreboding gnawed at him. After a while, he asked Hodor to carry him outside. The courtyard was in full morning bustle by then, men in Stark livery loading wagons for the king's retinue, stable hands preparing horses, and guards doing their final checks. In the center of it all was King Robert Baratheon himself, already astride a sturdy-looking courser, though he was clearly favoring his good side and wore only light armor. Eddard Stark stood beside him, along with Robb and Rickon, who gaped at the king's giant presence with a mixture of awe and familiarity. Sansa was nowhere to be seen, likely inside, fussing with greetings or courtesy in case she needed to appear. Arya, on the other hand, hovered near the edge of the courtyard with needle in her belt, eyes gleaming as she took in the swirl of activity. As Hodor placed Bran gently in his special saddle on the back of a small garron, the king turned and grinned at him. Ah, Bran Stark, Robert boomed, though his voice sounded a touch thinner than in years past. I expected you on the ramparts to see me off, or are you waiting to give me a good luck kiss as well? Bran mustered a grin, a little shy. Safe travels, Your Grace, he said. The North will always welcome you. Robert laughed, but the laugh turned into a faint grimace. We'll see if the rest of the North is as hospitable as Winterfell. I plan to test its mettle on the road. The last time I came up here I was chasing women and wine. This time my damn side hurts too much for that. He gave Bran a mock rueful look, then turned to Ned. All right, old friend. Any final words of advice before I set out to remind the realm why King Robert isn't dead on a boar's tusk? Ned inclined his head. Only to watch yourself, Your Grace. The roads along the coast aren't always safe, and if Tywin Lannister's men try anything. They won't, Robert said, though his expression hardened. They grumble, but they dare not raise arms against me. Not while I still breathe, anyway. He patted his side with a heavy hand. I'm not as pretty as I once was, but I'm still the king. Ned's mouth twitched in a wry semblance of a smile. Keep your guard close, and if you see trouble, send word. Winterfell will come to your aid if it must. Robert shrugged but said nothing more on that subject. Instead, he motioned for his men to begin forming up. The courtyard was a swirl of color and sigils, the crowned stag of Baratheon, the direwolf of Stark, and many lesser banners of knights who had accompanied the king. Even a few tully fish were visible on the cloak of a guard from River Run who had joined the retinue as a favor to the royal family. It reminded Bran of how big the realm was, and how fragile a tapestry it formed. Robert clapped Ned on the shoulder one last time, exchanged farewells with Robb and Arya, who ducked her head to hide a grin, and then set his horse forward. His retinue moved out through the gate, a rumble of hooves echoing over the ancient stone yard. Bran watched them vanish, the king's broad back soon disappearing around the curve of the wall. A hush settled behind them as the dust drifted. By mid-morning, Winterfell began to return to its usual rhythm. Robb went off to train with the Maester-at-Arms, Jory Castle. Rickon pestered Old Nan for stories in the Great Keep, and Arya promptly vanished to do whatever mischief she'd planned for the day. Ned signaled to Hodor to help Bran dismount, then they walked side by side. The father striding, the son carried gently, across the courtyard and beneath the inner arch. The early sunlight gave the gray stones a faint glimmer. Once they were alone, Ned said quietly, I sensed you wanted to speak with me. Tell me more about your dream. Bran bit his lip. It felt old, father. Old and cold and beyond the wall. I'm sure of that. I saw shapes in the snow, but they didn't seem like men. They moved too smoothly. Ned exhaled. I've heard rumors from the Night's Watch of increased sightings. Tormund Giants, Bane's raiders, free folk migrations, that sort of thing. But the Night's Watch rarely reports anything that sounds like the legends. White Walkers, that's been a children's tale for so long. Neither guy. And yet, so was the idea that I could see the future, Bran said softly. I'm not saying this for certain means an immediate threat. I think we should be ready. Ned considered his son's words gravely. The days are growing shorter. Winter is coming. I shall send more provisions to Castle Black, help them stockpile for a harsher season. Bran nodded, feeling some weight lift from his chest. Though he still worried, at least his father wouldn't dismiss him outright. The stark words had always been an admonition against complacency. Winter is coming. Perhaps that old truth was creeping upon them quietly and inexorably. When they reached the covered walkway near the Great Keep, Ned gave Bran a reassuring pat on the arm. Go on inside and rest if you need. I must look to some letters that came this morning. One from your mother. She's still in the Riverlands, seeing to your grandfather's tomb. She hopes to return before the heavy snows set in. He hesitated. Her letter mentions that the Riverlords are uneasy. Tywin Lannister has not marched openly, but there are movements in the western hills. Some fear banditry or something else. Now and... Bran lowered his eyes. Is that the next war? Let us pray not, Ned replied. We've had enough warlike talk for a lifetime. With that, he left, cloak swishing behind him, and Bran was left to reflect on how swiftly peace could fray. He decided not to head back inside just yet. Instead, he had Hodor carry him to the Godswood, which was still damp with morning dew. Ancient oaks and ironwood stood silent sentinel, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The heart tree, its trunk carved with that solemn face, regarded Bran with its red eyes and seemed to know more than it let on. Summer paced beside them as they went, ears perked at every rustle of leaves or scuttle of squirrels. Once they arrived near the heart tree, Bran had Hodor set him down gently on a patch of soft moss, close enough that he could lean against a stone outcropping if he wished. He closed his eyes, letting the scents and sounds of the Godswood wash over him. A hush fell, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaf or the distant call of a raven. Sometimes when Bran sat here, he felt as if he could almost slip into another consciousness, as if the old gods themselves nudged him to look deeper. In the past he had caught fleeting glimpses, beyond time, beyond place. But today, only the mild hush of the morning enveloped him. It still calmed him, and that was enough. Before long, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Bran opened his eyes to see his half-brother Jon Snow, walking toward him with Ghost at his side. Jon had traveled south to King's Landing before, then returned north, and now the plan was for him to finally take his vows at the Night's Watch. But the timing had been delayed, partly due to King Robert's prolonged stay, partly due to Ned's insistence that Jon remain a bit longer. Jon had grown taller, face more angular, but his gray eyes held that same thoughtful, sometimes melancholy cast. Ghost, his albino direwolf, was near grown now, silent and watchful, with fur like freshly fallen snow. Jon smiled when he saw Bran. Hiding in the Godswood. Bran smiled back. No, just thinking. He gestured for Jon to join him. Jon nodded and took a seat on a root, leaning his back against the trunk of a slender oak. Hodor stood quietly to the side, content to watch the leaves sway. Father told me the king departed, Jon said, running a hand through his thick hair. I wonder if it's for good or if he'll come back again once his progress is done. He might return, maybe in the spring, Bran answered. But I doubt it'll be the same. I think he's eager to get back to King's Landing, or to fight a war somewhere if it means feeling alive again. Bran hesitated, turning his gaze toward Jon. Father said you'll be leaving soon, to join the Watch. Are you certain you want that? Jon's face tightened slightly. It's not about want, Bran. It's what I decided. Father said I can remain in Winterfell if I wish, but... He sighed. I need a place of my own, even if that place is the Wall. Bran studied him, thinking how that might align with the strange dream he'd had. If something truly stirred beyond the wall, maybe Jon's presence there could prove crucial. Then we'll miss you, Bran said quietly. But perhaps the Watch needs you. Jon's brows knitted. The Watch is full of criminals and broken men, they say. But maybe we can do some good there. He glanced at Ghost, who stared back with red eyes that mirrored summer's watchful gold. Anyway, I'm not leaving just yet. Father wants me to travel to the White Harbor with some of our men first. We need to check on the ships there, see if they'll help supply the Watch. It's a courtesy to Lord Manderley. Father wants me to learn the responsibilities of a Stark, even if I'm not, well, not in line to inherit. Whoa. Bran frowned. You're still his son. You shouldn't talk like that. A faint wry smile touched Jon's lips. We all have our roles. He paused, then gently changed the subject. You've been dreaming again, haven't you? He asked, as if reading Bran's thoughts. Bran nodded. Yes, about cold and snow and things in the darkness. I can't see them clearly. Jon's expression darkened, thoughtful. At the wall, maybe I'll hear stories that match your dreams. The men of the Watch have all sorts of tales from beyond. If I learn something, I'll send word. Nah. They lapsed into silence for a time, both lost in thought, while their direwolves meandered around the clearing, sniffing the damp ground. The hush of the godswood was comforting. Even Hodor was subdued, humming faintly to himself as he gazed up at the thick canopy of leaves. Eventually, Jon stood. I should see Maester Luwin about some letters Father wants me to carry. Will I see you at supper? Bran nodded. Yes, I'll come to the hall. I'm getting better at that special saddle on my own. 9. Jon's smile was genuine this time, softening his face. I'm glad. You look well, Bran, truly. He reached out, squeezed Bran's shoulder lightly, then turned to go, Ghost trailing behind him. Bran watched his brother's retreating form, the interplay of shadow and light beneath the ancient trees, and felt a surge of affection. He hoped the wall would not swallow Jon up forever. When they were alone once more, Summer came to press her head against Bran's leg. Bran patted her thick fur absently, eyes drawn again to the heart tree. The old face stared back, red sap tears marking its cheeks. He could almost imagine the tree was whispering, though no words reached his ears. So much was changing, so many roads branching away from the moment everything might have collapsed. Though war had been staved off, Bran could sense that the story was far from over. He thanked the gods in his heart, nonetheless. Perhaps they were guiding him still, and guiding House Stark toward whatever came next. Time passed quietly for a few days, with the routines of Winterfell resuming after the royal departure. Word came that Robert and his retinue had safely reached Torrhen Square, where they were greeted by the lady of the house. The king's next plan was to skirt the coastline and possibly visit Bear Island before turning west toward the Riverlands. Rumors trickled in regarding Lord Tywin Lannister's maneuvers in the Westerlands, but no open conflict had arisen yet. His letter-writing campaign continued, occasionally demanding the release of Cersei and her children, but King Robert had refused until the succession was made official with Stannis' full endorsement. Cersei and her brood, under guard in King's Landing, were living in guarded luxury, reportedly furious but powerless to act while Robert still lived. Soon enough, letters arrived from beyond the north. One was from Renly Baratheon, who had remained in the capital to oversee the transition of power in the small council. He wrote of tension in King's Landing, of lords who questioned the king's decisions, of minor riots in Flea Bottom that might have been stoked by leftover Lannister gold. But for the moment, the city still stood behind Robert. Another was from Ser Barristan Selmy, offering a courteous update on the continuing standoff with the Lannisters. According to Barristan, Jaime Lannister had become resigned to captivity within the Red Keep, passing his days sparring with whatever knights would dare face him, or else brooding in his chambers. Joffrey was kept under watch in a separate suite, evidently bored and resentful. Rumor had it that Myrcella and Tommen, at least, found some measure of contentment in books and occasional supervised strolls in the gardens. Ned Stark, upon reading these letters, nodded to himself with weary satisfaction. It's an uneasy peace, he murmured to Maester Luwin one day as they stood in the library tower. Better uneasy than blood-drenched. Maester Luwin adjusted his chain, eyes flicking over a dusty tome on the table before them. One can hope the realm manages to avoid war. But we must be vigilant. House Lannister is formidable, and Tywin is patient. Ned sighed. True enough. Bran often found himself listening in on these conversations by chance, or by quiet curiosity. Sometimes he wondered whether his father regretted stepping so deeply into southern politics. But whenever they talked alone, Ned insisted that to do otherwise would have spelled doom. We had no choice, he would say. If we'd done nothing, Robert would be dead, and the Lannisters would rule through that boy. Better to endure the tension than face that dark future. Yet the new path was forging alliances and divisions in unexpected ways. Rumors spoke of a stir among the Reach Lords. Mace Tyrell and his brood had not openly declared for or against the king's stance, but seemed poised to negotiate. The Vale of Arryn remained aloof, with Lysa still ruling as regent for her young son, Robin. She had refused to join any side, citing the neutrality of the Vale. Littlefinger, as master of coin, continued to feed tidbits of information to all parties, though none fully trusted him. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon had delayed coming to the capital, citing storms around Dragonstone that prevented a swift crossing. Some wondered if he was waiting for the political dust to settle, or if he was simply mustering ships and men in case Tywin Lannister made a move. Amid these swirling intrigues, life at Winterfell remained in many ways unchanged. The castle's people carried out their duties, the bannermen kept guard, and the northern harvest was brought in. Robb Stark took on more responsibilities as his father's heir, overseeing local disputes, leading practice drills with the guard. Arya, as ever, slipped away to practice swordplay with the old arms master, or to wander about with Nymeria, though, now that Nymeria was larger, her presence was more noticeable, sometimes scaring the servants. Rickon grew taller, still prone to tantrums, though Shaggy Dog seemed to calm a bit when near summer. Bran continued to hone his ability with the special saddle for riding. He was determined not to be housebound anymore, even if he could not climb like he once had. And on one crisp afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the leaf-bare branches of the godswood, a raven arrived bearing an unexpected message. It bore the sigil of House Targaryen, that ancient three-headed dragon. The messenger itself was from the east, though how it had come into the hands of a Westerosi ravenkeeper was unclear. The note was addressed to the King of the Seven Kingdoms, but it had arrived at Winterfell rather than King's Landing, as if guided by uncertain knowledge of the realm's power centers. Ned Stark opened it with stern caution. The letter was brief, couched in odd phrasing that suggested the writer's uncertain mastery of the common tongue. It claimed that Daenerys Targaryen, last scion of the deposed House Targaryen, had married Khal Drogo of the Dothraki, and birthed a child said to be the stallion who mounts the world. Further, it stated that Daenerys had new designs on Westeros, though whether they were peaceful or warlike, the letter did not make explicit. It was a riddle more than a straightforward declaration. No formal threat was made, yet the tone was ominous. Something about a dragon waking, the dead city in the east, and powers gathering. Ned read it in troubled silence, then shared it with Maester Luwin, who pursed his lips and said, "We have heard rumors for some time that Viserys Targaryen sought aid from across the narrow sea. If his sister truly has the support of a Dothraki Khalasar, that could be significant. The Dothraki are fearsome, though they rarely sail. Yet if she truly sees herself as the rightful queen of Westeros..." Ned's frown deepened. "We have enough trouble with Tywin. Another Targaryen attempt could tear the realm open. But this Daenerys is still in Essos. The Dothraki are reluctant seafarers. It might be but an empty threat." He set the letter aside. "Still, I must inform Robert. I'll have a raven sent at once to whichever location he's likely to be heading. The crown can decide how to respond." He paused, thinking of how Robert had once sworn to end the Targaryen line entirely. But that was the Robert of old, full of rage and heartbreak from losing Lyanna. Was he still so vehement, or had near death softened him? Weeks passed, and though Ned sent multiple ravens after the king, no immediate reply came. Possibly Robert was busy or traveling through territories where ravens found it hard to locate him quickly. A sense of unease settled on Ned, subtle but persistent, especially when new tidings reached Winterfell about dark omens in the far north. Rangers of the Night's Watch had been found dead near the base of the wall, pale with fear. They'd apparently encountered something beyond. The stories were hush-hushed, shared only in cryptic fragments, as if speaking them aloud risked summoning the threat. Jon Snow, upon hearing these tidings, grew more resolute about joining the watch soon. Meanwhile, at Winterfell the air grew colder, the days shorter. Snow dusted the courtyards, and the younger Stark children delighted in it, while the older ones recognized it as a reminder that the harsh northern winter might arrive in full force anytime. Through it all, Bran's dreams persisted, dreams of a vast whiteness, of shapes in the swirling snow, glimpses of a haunting blue glow in the darkness. He'd awaken with a pounding heart, summer whining softly at his side. He tried to share this with his father once more, who only said, "If trouble is truly brewing beyond the wall, the Night's Watch must prepare. I'll send more supplies." Bran wanted to say it might take more than supplies. He wanted to speak of the old powers, of the possibility that men alone could not stop what lay beyond. But he couldn't find the words. He was a boy after all, and the realm's grown men would weigh politics and war long before they listened to stories of ancient terrors. Still, he would not simply forget what he had seen. One day, after an especially vivid night vision, Bran mustered the courage to talk with Maester Luwin. He found the old man in the library tower, cataloging a shipment of books that had come up from White Harbor. The warmth of a nearby brazier took the chill from the air, and the smell of parchment and leather bindings filled the space. Luwin greeted Bran kindly, offering him a seat by the table. Bran began hesitantly, describing his newest dreams. "They're stronger now, Maester. I can feel the cold like knives in my skin. I see. I can't be sure. But it looks like men made of ice." "No. Ah." Luwin gave him a gentle, measured look. "Bran, you know the old stories well. The others, the White Walkers, all of that is said to have vanished thousands of years ago. Their existence now is questionable. You're a bright lad, you know that many an old story is just that. A story. Your accident, your earlier visions. It's possible your imagination conjures these images. Or it could be that you have some gifts. But gifts can be misleading." Bran bit his lip, feeling frustration well up. "I saw things before. They came true. Maybe this is real too." Luwin placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. "Perhaps, but you must be careful, my boy. If you cry doom too often, people might cease to believe you at all." He gave Bran a small, apologetic smile. "Still, I will note your dreams, and I'll mention them in my next message to the Citadel. There may be records that align with your descriptions. One never knows which piece of old lore may prove relevant." Bran nodded, some of his frustration easing. Maester Luwin was cautious but not dismissive. At least he would keep an open mind. "Thank you." Leaving the library tower, Bran felt a swirl of emotions, wishing he were older or had some recognized authority that would make people listen without doubt. He was only 8, perhaps 9 now. He sometimes forgot with all that had happened. If the White Walkers truly stirred, the realm might not realize it until it was too late. But he pushed that fear aside. He had already changed one future with his visions. Perhaps in time he could influence another. The winter deepened, and news from Robert at last arrived. A raven from the Riverlands stated that the king had heard the rumors of Daenerys Targaryen's letter and was furious, though not yet resolved on a particular course of action. He demanded more information. Was this letter truly from Daenerys? Was she indeed building an army across the narrow sea? The king ordered his spy masters to investigate. Meanwhile, Stannis had at last arrived in King's Landing, presumably to formalize the succession. Tension between Stannis and the Queen's factions soared, though with Cersei locked in her tower rooms, her influence was limited. Robert's letter ended on an ambiguous note. "I'll not be bested by some silver-haired girl with horse lords at her heels. If she lands, she'll find out what steel tastes like. But for now, I must focus on this realm. On Tywin's threats, the Vale's silence, the Tyrell's preening, and the rest." Ned read the letter to his household in the Great Hall. The assembled lords, along with the castle staff who were allowed to bear witness, whispered at mention of the Targaryen. The distant threat seemed overshadowed by more immediate concerns. Even so, that night, Bran lay awake imagining what it would be like if dragons returned to Westeros. He pictured the beast's fire set against a winter storm, and it chilled him more than the night air ever could. Before the next dawn, Jon Snow departed Winterfell at last, heading to White Harbor with a handful of Stark men as Ned had instructed. The plan was for Jon to handle certain negotiations there, then continue north to the Wall to take his vows. Bran said his goodbyes with a heavy heart. Jon had reassured him that they would meet again, that he'd write letters from Castle Black, and that if these others or White Walkers truly appear, the Watch will see them first. Bran forced a smile, not wanting his fears to dampen Jon's resolve. So he simply hugged his brother, even though the awkward harness made it more difficult. Arya and Robb said their farewells too, each in their own way. Robb with a firm handshake and a promise to bring men if the Watch needed help. Arya with a half-hidden grin and a playful punch to Jon's arm. Rickon seemed confused, not fully understanding why Jon was leaving. Only Ned's face showed the weight of it all, the quiet acceptance that sometimes families must part. As Jon and the others rode out through the gates, Ghost padding at his horse's side, Bran couldn't help feeling that he was watching a piece of the future slip into the unknown. And in the quiet after they vanished, he thought of his dream again, certain that the swirling cold was creeping closer. Winterfell's routine ground on. Letters arrived, letters were sent. The carpenters repaired a portion of the stable roof that had collapsed under heavy snow. Robb oversaw the training yards, dueling with a particular intensity that belied his youth. Arya kept chasing her own interests, sometimes sneaking off for archery practice or to explore the crypts, and Ned would sigh and call her wild as a direwolf. The threat from the west still simmered. Lord Tywin had not marched, but rumor held that he was marshalling swords. The fiasco in King's Landing had effectively shattered the old alliances, and no one knew how it might be mended. One blustery day, a raven arrived from the citadel in Old Town, addressed to Maester Luwin. It contained a reference to a partial manuscript, an ancient text that described the long night and the battle against the others, thousands of years in the past. The letter recommended caution, stating that the citadel had found no modern evidence that these others still roamed. But it included a passage that might interest House Stark. In the coldest reach of winter, they say, an unnatural hush came upon the land, and pale shapes with glowing blue eyes walked forth. They brought with them the wind of death, and steel did not bite them as it should. Only weapons of dragonglass or a certain spelled steel had effect, or so the legends claim. Many question the truth of these accounts, but caution is advised. The world is large and old, and some horrors may lie sleeping. Bran listened with hushed fascination as Maester Luwin read this aloud in Ned's solar. He saw the flicker in his father's eyes, the wariness. Luwin set the parchment aside, exhaling. "It's only a legend," he said again, but even that sounded slightly uncertain. "That's what we told ourselves about the idea of a Lannister coup too," Ned murmured, voice grim. "Until it nearly happened." He glanced at the Maester. "I'll not risk everything on legend, but I won't dismiss it outright either. We should send a supply of dragonglass daggers to the Wall, discreetly, as a precaution." Luwin nodded. "Very well, my lord." Bran felt a strange mix of anxiety and satisfaction. They were taking the possibility seriously now. Perhaps that was enough to tip the balance. He remembered how his father's caution had saved King Robert's life. Perhaps that same caution could save the realm from an even more ancient threat. In the week that followed, Ned arranged for a modest but significant shipment of dragonglass daggers, arrowheads, and spear points to be quietly sent north to Castle Black. He claimed it was novelty gift, or historical curiosity. The old Castellan frowned but did not question the order. A handful of northern blacksmiths were also called upon to experiment with dragonglass forging. This was not public knowledge. Ned wanted to avoid needless rumors, but in the hush of Winterfell's armory, blacksmiths hammered and tested dark shards of obsidian, forging them into lethal, if somewhat fragile points. At times, Bran would find an excuse to visit the armory and watch the process, though the heat and noise made it uncomfortable. The blacksmith, Micken, grumbled at first about the strangeness of melting stone, but quickly grew fascinated by the challenge of working with obsidian. He managed to create arrowheads that could be set onto shafts, and he experimented with layering them onto a steel dagger's edge. Most shattered under direct impact, but a few withstood moderate force. Bran's eyes lit up each time a shard didn't break. In those moments, he felt closer to the heart of the mystery, as if he were forging weapons for a war that might exist only in old tales, or might soon become terrifyingly real. Meanwhile, the realm outside Winterfell continued its complicated dance. Additional letters from King's Landing revealed that Stannis had refused to wear the crown as heir apparent until Robert's health was unquestionable, and until an official ceremony was staged in front of the great lords. Robert, proud as he was, refused to abdicate while still breathing. So a new deadlock formed, with the king effectively continuing his rule, while Stannis lingered, waiting, in the capital. Cersei and Jaime remained under guard, though some whisperers insisted that Jaime had begun to gather support among certain Goldcloak captains, hoping for an eventual jailbreak. Robert's watchers kept him contained, but tension ran high. Tyrion Lannister was said to be moving carefully, trying to broker some arrangement that would see the Lannisters remain powerful without open conflict. In the Vale, Lysa Arryn refused entreaties to rejoin the royal court, fiercely protective of her son and her autonomy. Down in Dorne, the Martells were quiet, which was sometimes more ominous than open defiance. As for Tywin Lannister, the old lion seemed to bide his time, building alliances in the west, possibly funneling coin into certain unscrupulous pockets around the realm. Yet he did not raise his banners for outright war. Perhaps he believed that if he waited long enough, the realm would tear itself apart from within, giving him a chance to enforce a better settlement. Or perhaps he still hoped to see Joffrey crowned, though that possibility seemed remote with Robert alive and proclaiming his bastardy. In Winterfell's courtyard, the daily cycle of chores and training continued. Bran persisted in strengthening his arms, working with a small wooden sword to build muscle, though he knew he could never be a typical knight. Still, it gave him focus. One bright morning, while he practiced with the help of a small stable boy, a new arrival came through the main gate, a man with the black cloak of the Night's Watch, riding a tired Roundsy, accompanied by 2 outriders in stark livery. Bran recognized the watchman's face as he dismounted, a ranger by the name of Tywin, with a missing ear and a ragged mustache. Tywin was known for wandering the deep woods beyond the wall. Ned Stark came down the steps from the Great Keep to greet him, with Robb at his side. Bran paused his training, wooden sword in hand, and inched his Garin closer to hear what was said. "My lord," Tywin began, bowing quickly. "I come on behalf of Lord Commander Mormont with grave tidings. We found more bodies, men of the Watch, dead in strange ways, and we've had glimpses of pale figures in the forest at night. The free folk are streaming south, terrified. They speak of White Walkers." A hush descended over the courtyard. Ned's expression turned stony. "You saw them yourself?" Tywin shook his head. "No, my lord. But I heard things in the night, and I found footprints in fresh snow that were not quite human." Ranger Othar claimed he saw a pair of living shadows that moved like ice. "That same night," Othar vanished. "We found only a patch of blood in the snow. The Lord Commander is sending requests for more men and for help investigating. He says that if the White Walkers are real, the entire realm could be at risk." "Now, Bran's heart pounded. He felt a grim certainty that his nightmares were stepping into the light of day. He saw the flicker in his father's eyes, the tightening of Robb's jaw. The onlookers in the courtyard muttered nervously. "Lord Commander Mormont shall have the support of Winterfell," Ned said firmly. "We've already prepared some shipments. I'll send more, and I will write to the king. He must be told." Tywin bowed again. "Thank you, my lord. We'll take all we can get. The men at Castle Black are spread thin. With all the trouble in the south, the Watch has been forgotten by many. But I fear we'll soon need every sword we can muster." Ned dismissed Tywin to rest and refresh himself, while he ordered the outriders to stable the man's horse. The courtyard gradually returned to its tasks, but a whisper of unease lingered in the cold air. Bran felt it most acutely, a visceral knowledge that the shape of his dreams had begun creeping into reality. When Ned retreated to his solar, Robb and Bran followed. Ned paced by the narrow windows, glancing at the fresh snow that dusted Winterfell's walls. Robb leaned against the large oak table, arms folded, tension in his stance. Bran waited in silence, clasping his hands together as summer nudged at his side. Finally, Ned spoke. "The king must be told, and I must also recall the vassals of the north to rally to our side, but we must proceed carefully. If we cry out about White Walkers, half the realm will laugh it off, or dismiss it as a ploy. We need proof." Robb nodded. "If you'd like, father, I could travel to the wall, see for myself, maybe even venture north with a party of rangers." Bran's head whipped around to stare at his brother. The notion of Robb riding beyond the wall sent a chill through his vein. Yet, Robb's gaze was steady, unafraid. He was growing into a man, after all. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a resolute sense of duty. Ned pursed his lips. It's dangerous, but perhaps necessary. If the Watch truly is facing an ancient threat, we need eyes we trust. Let me think on it. We must also consider the possibility that Tywin might use any northern absence as an opportunity. The realm is precariously balanced. Bran's voice came out small but determined. We should also send them the dragonglass weapons. Ned turned his attention to Bran, eyes softening just a bit. We will. In fact, we'll send Tywin back with as many as we can spare right away. That much is certain. He paused. Bran, I know you've had dreams about this. If you see something that might help us, or if anything changes in your visions, let me know immediately. Bran nodded, a swirl of emotion inside him. Fear, relief, pride that his father trusted him. I will, he promised. In the days that followed, Winterfell prepared to dispatch more supplies north, along with an urgent letter to the king. Ned spent long hours drafting his message, carefully phrasing the details to avoid sounding like a madman. He stressed that the Night's Watch was encountering threats beyond the usual wildlings, that the free folk spoke of mythic terrors, and that Lord Commander Mormont urgently requested assistance. He even hinted that if Robert doubted these accounts, perhaps Stannis or some trusted envoy could journey north to see for themselves. Bran felt both an odd excitement and a deep dread. The story he had foreseen was no longer just in his nightmares. Each evening he slept uneasily, visions flashing of a line of dark silhouettes crossing a barren tundra, leaving frozen footprints behind. Occasionally he also caught glimpses of a great castle hall with a black stone throne, someplace he did not recognize, where firelight flickered across a dragon's skull. He would wake sweating, uncertain if that was a vision of Daenerys Targaryen or a memory from the realm's past. Everything seemed connected, in ways he couldn't fully grasp. One crisp morning, a raven from the Riverlands arrived bearing surprising news. Lady Catelyn Stark would soon return to Winterfell, accompanied by a party of Tully men. She had concluded her business at Riverrun, and planned to be home before the worst snows sealed the roads. Ned's countenance lit up at the thought of his wife's imminent return, though he worried about the state of the roads. Regardless, the castle made ready to welcome its lady, with fresh rushes in the halls, additional fires stoked to keep the chambers warm, and the staff ensuring that everything was in good order. As the day approached for her arrival, Bran found himself eager to see her. He missed her gentle hands, her calming presence, even if she sometimes worried over him too much. She had left not long after Father's return from King's Landing, wanting to pay respects to her late father's memory and handle Tully affairs. Now, the family would be together again, minus Jon, who was on his own path to the wall. On the afternoon she was expected, Bran sat in the courtyard with Rickon and Arya, the three of them sharing stories while the stable hands bustled about. Arya had her arms crossed and was complaining that the sewing instructor was useless, and that she'd rather be out with the archers. Rickon was busy playing with Shaggy Dog, who was tugging at a rope toy. Bran listened with mild amusement, occasionally glancing at the gates. Gray clouds overhead threatened a fresh flurry of snow. At long last, a distant sound of hooves alerted them. Through the gates rode a small party bearing the sigil of House Tully, a leaping trout on a field of red and blue. Their cloaks were caked with frost, and their horses breathed clouds of steam into the cold air. At their head was Lady Catelyn Stark, wrapped in a thick fur cloak. Her features were touched by windburn, but her eyes shone with relief. Behind her rode a handful of Tully guards, along with Sir Roderick Castle, who had been sent south to escort her. Cheers went up from the onlookers, though the crowd was not large. Ned appeared at the top of the steps to greet her with a warm embrace. Robb, who had been overseeing some men-at-arms, rushed forward to help her dismount. Bran guided his Garren closer, heart fluttering. Catelyn's gaze swept the courtyard until it landed on Bran. She moved to him swiftly, kneeling beside him as soon as he was lowered from the saddle. Her gloved hands cupped his cheeks, tears brimming in her eyes. "My brave boy," she murmured. "You look well." Bran found his throat tight with emotion. "I'm better," he said. "Father's been taking care of us. We're all right." She smiled, though it trembled slightly. Then she turned to Arya, hugging her, and Rickon, who rushed into her arms, babbling about everything that had happened. Next, she embraced Robb, and finally stepped to Ned. The way they looked at each other spoke volumes, of relief, of a shared burden. She brushed a hand across Ned's cheek. "I missed you," she whispered. They exchanged a few quiet words, then turned to the rest of the courtyard. Catelyn composed herself, addressing them with a gracious nod. "Thank you for the warm welcome. Let us go inside and share some mulled wine. My men are weary, and I have much to discuss with my lord husband." So the party made its way into the great hall, servants bustling to set out refreshments. Soon, the hall echoed with conversation, the clink of cups, and the grateful sighs of men warming themselves by the roaring fires. Catelyn sat with Ned at the high table, their heads close together, while Robb oversaw the distribution of drinks. Arya slipped away after a short time, no doubt searching for a more interesting vantage. Bran lingered, though, wanting to absorb his mother's presence as much as possible. At length, Catelyn beckoned him over to where she and Ned sat. He managed to maneuver his chair near enough that she could reach out and hold his hand. Her eyes swept over him with concern. "You've grown, but you're still so pale. Are you in any pain?" Bran shook his head. "Not really. Just sometimes it aches when the cold seeps in." She nodded, smoothing his hair back in a maternal gesture. "I'm sorry I was gone so long. River Run needed settling, with tensions among the Riverlords. Some still fear Lannister reprisals, others whisper of the Targaryen girl. It seems all the realm is stirring." Ned sighed. "Indeed. The realm stirs. And there is more. We've had grave news from the Night's Watch. There may be a greater threat looming beyond our petty struggles." "Ned, she glanced at Bran. "Has something happened?" Ned summarized the tidings from Tywin, the sense of encroaching doom at the wall, and how the free folk believed the White Walkers were stirring. Catelyn's brow creased, disbelief and worry mingling in her expression. She leaned back in her chair, absent-mindedly clutching a cup of mulled wine. "The White Walkers? I've heard such tales all my life but never thought them real. Could it truly be?" Ned's gaze flicked to Bran and back to her. "I do not know for certain, but we have reason to fear it. We're sending aid, and I have pressed the king to take it seriously." "No." Catelyn closed her eyes for a moment, as if summoning strength. "I returned hoping to find some measure of peace here, away from the turmoil of the south, and now you tell me the storm is gathering in the far north." She shook her head, then squared her shoulders. "Well, if winter is truly coming in its darkest form, the Starks will stand. River Run stands with us, and so do many good men of the Trident. They remember the help you gave us, Ned." He reached out, covering her hand with his own. "We'll need all the unity we can get." That night, a quiet dinner was held in the smaller hall, just for the family and a few close retainers. The mood was subdued. Catelyn and Ned had their heads together, discussing letters from the Tullys and the shape of the realm. Robb conversed in low tones with Theon Greyjoy, who was also in attendance, though Theon wore his typical half-smirk that made it hard to tell if he was taking any of this seriously. Arya fidgeted, glancing out the window as snow began to fall heavily. Sansa had come down briefly but said she felt ill, and returned to her chambers, accompanied by Septa Mordane's fussing. Rickon, overtired, was nodding off into his bowl, so a servant took him to bed. Bran sat quietly, listening. He felt the pressure building in the castle's air, a sense of something on the horizon that none could fully name. Over the following days, Catelyn slipped back into the rhythms of Winterfell, speaking with the stewards, planning for the winter stores, making sure each outlying holdfast had what it needed. She would often find a moment to sit with Bran, ask him about his exercises, about his life in the castle. Sometimes he sensed the sadness in her eyes, the guilt that she had not been there after his accident. But he also felt her love, fierce and unwavering. That soothed him. And so the winter wore on, snow piling up in drifts along the walls, the days shrinking until light itself seemed ration. Castle life was a world of flickering lanterns, braziers, and the hush of icy wind in the courtyards. Ravens came and went, bringing news from scattered corners of Westeros. Most of the news was about the simmering tension between King Robert and the Lannisters, or the Tyrells' ambiguous stance, or the Vale's stony isolation. Occasionally there were rumors of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, though the details were contradictory, Some said her Dothraki lord had died, and she commanded a fraction of his Khalasar. Others whispered she had dragons. Most scoffed at that idea. Dragons were as legendary as the others. And yet, one day a message arrived from Jon Snow at the wall. It was delivered by a black-cloaked brother who trudged through the snow looking half-frozen. The letter was brief, describing how Jon had taken his vows, how the men of the Watch were uneasy, how the wildlings coming over the Frostfangs spoke of an advancing terror. Jon wrote, "Something moves in the haunted forest. We have found bodies, men and beasts, with no sign of how they died. Only that the cold clung to them. Lord Commander Mormont prepares for a great ranging beyond the wall. He wants to find answers, or at least break the fear that is gripping us. I am to remain at Castle Black for now. We will stand. Tell Bran I remember his dreams and caution. We will remain vigilant. Nye." Bran read these lines over and over, a strange mixture of pride and dread filling him. Jon was in the thick of it, trying to protect the realm from an unseen enemy. And the White Walkers, if that was indeed what they faced, seemed more than just a campfire story. Yet, the rest of Westeros remained fixated on politics. Robb, hearing of the Night's Watch's precarious position, pressed Ned again to allow him to lead a contingent north. Ned refused, citing the risk from House Lannister. Yet the father's face was torn, as though he himself wanted to rush to the wall but knew he could not abandon the realm's precarious balance. So the Starks waited, hearts heavy, hoping for a sign that the king would act. That sign came unexpectedly, near the close of a bitterly cold day, when another raven arrived from King's Landing. The missive was from Stannis Baratheon, writing in a clipped formal style. He informed Ned that King Robert had at last returned to the capital after his progress, and was in failing health. The old injury from the boar hunt had never fully healed, and repeated exposure during his travels had worsened it. Fever gripped the king, leaving him weak and bedridden. A conclave of maesters attended him, but his condition was dire. Stannis wrote, "If the king should perish, I stand ready to claim the throne as his rightful heir, in accordance with the king's own decree. Yet, if the North has any knowledge that could save his life, speak now. Otherwise, prepare for a realm without Robert Baratheon." Ned's reaction was swift and grim. He summoned the household to the Great Hall, and informed them that King Robert might be dying. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The older retainers remembered the chaos of the Mad King's fall, and feared another war. Catelyn, at Ned's side, paled. Arya looked stricken, while Sansa clasped her hands together as if wanting to pray. Bran recalled the earlier vision, a boar, a crown stained with blood, King Robert lying near death. They had changed that future once, but fate seemed determined to circle back around. Ned spoke quietly. "I will leave for King's Landing at once with a small retinue. The realm needs stability. If Robert dies, we must ensure no pretender tries to seize the throne by force. I will support Lord Stannis' claim if that is indeed the king's wish. Robb, you shall remain in Winterfell, as my heir and warden of the North. Catelyn, if you choose to come south, I would welcome your counsel, but I fear the roads are dangerous." Catelyn squared her shoulders. "I'll stay here with the children. The North needs a firm hand if trouble arises." Naboryondi. That evening, Ned wrote letters to be dispatched, explaining to various northern lords that he was traveling south, and urging them to remain calm, to watch the borders for any Lannister movement. Early the next dawn, Ned mounted up with a handful of Stark men, including Jory, Castle's cousin, Tom Castle, and a few other trusted guards. They set off in the swirling snow, cloaked in fur, bound for the treacherous journey to King's Landing. As Bran watched his father vanish into the white expanse, he felt a pang of memory, how he had once waved farewell when Ned left to be the king's hand. Then, it had ended in near tragedy. Now again, Ned Stark was riding south to keep the realm from spinning into chaos. This time, at least, he went armed with knowledge. Bran prayed it would be enough. In the days that followed, Winterfell hunkered down as fierce winds battered the walls. Snowdrifts climbed higher, and the pine forests bowed under the weight of ice. Rickon grew restless, whining that it was too cold to play outside. Arya prowled the corridors, practicing sword forms in empty chambers. Sansa stayed mostly in her room, writing letters or reading old songs of chivalry, which, according to the servants, she found less enthralling than before. Catelyn took on the full weight of governance in Ned's absence, consulting with Robb about everything from food stores to patrol routes. The pair of them made a good team, if a somewhat stern one. Catelyn's sense of courtesy balanced Robb's more martial outlook. Occasionally she asked Bran's opinion, especially if it concerned the well-being of the children or the farmland near the castle. Bran continued to dream of that endless white plain. But sometimes he also dreamed he was inside a hall of red stone, hearing a woman's voice chanting words in a foreign tongue. It sounded like High Valyrian, though Bran knew only scraps from his lessons. He glimpsed shadowy shapes behind her, dragon-like forms that hissed steam. He would wake with his heart thrumming, uncertain if he had just visited Daenerys Targaryen's vision across the sea. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, to be linked not only to the cold north, but perhaps to the hot lands of the east. Then one night, the hush of Winterfell was shattered by urgent voices echoing off the courtyard walls. Bran, who was dozing in his room, snapped awake to the sound of horns in the distance. Summer, curled at the foot of the bed, sprang up, ears perking. Bran summoned Hodor, who carried him out onto the balcony that overlooked the courtyard. What he saw made his stomach lurch. Men running with torches, shouting about a rider approaching at speed from the south gate. The rider bore the king's colors, along with a direwolf sigil signifying a message for House Stark. Catelyn and Robb appeared below moments later, cloaks hastily thrown over their nightclothes. The rider, a knight in battered plate, nearly fell from his horse in exhaustion. Snow clung to his beard, and he had the wild look of a man who had been riding without rest for too long. "Lady Stark," he gasped, his breath creating puffs of steam. "I bring word from Lord Stark. The king is—" He trailed off, trembling. "Is he dead?" Catelyn demanded, her voice tight. The knight shook his head. "Not yet, my lady. But he's near the end, or so the maesters say. Lord Stark bade me to ride ahead, warn the realm. He says the Lannisters, some of them, may be moving to take the throne by force if Robert draws his last breath. Stannis is overshadowed in the city by Tywin's gold. They fear a coup, or a riot. Lord Stark is trying to hold the peace, but he is outnumbered. And there's more. The city hums with rumors that Daenerys Targaryen might land on the coast soon with a small force. The king is too weak to decide anything. Lord Stark begs for reinforcements, my lady. The realm stands on the edge of chaos. Now in. A hush fell. The men around them muttered in dismay. Robb's hands curled into fists. Summer, on the balcony beside Bran, let out a low whine. Bran felt his heart pound. So the precarious peace was dissolving at last, pulled apart by the king's failing health and the swirl of ambitious players. Another war threatened, maybe multiple wars. And all the while, the real threat to the north grew stronger, unheeded. Catelyn steeled herself. Then we must act. Robb, prepare to summon our bannermen. Send ravens to the great houses of the north. We'll not let the Lannisters seize the throne by cunning or force. And as for the Targaryen, her voice caught. Gods help us if dragons truly return. Robb nodded, face grim. We'll do what must be done. If father needs men, we'll send them. And so, the horn sounded again, this time summoning the lords of the north to prepare for an unthinkable scenario. A new war, possibly on multiple fronts, while winter's teeth closed around them. Men rushed about, fueling forges, sharpening blades, taking inventory of horses and provisions. Bran watched from the balcony, the cold wind biting his cheeks. For the second time in his short life, he felt the unstoppable tide of events dragging House Stark into a deadly struggle for the fate of Westeros. Days became a blur of preparations. Ravens flew in and out, many lost in sudden blizzards or forced to turn back. A trickle of northern lords arrived, those close enough to travel in heavy snow. Small retinues from the Dreadfort, from Deepwood Motte, from Bear Island. All had questions. Was the king truly at death's door? Were the Lannisters about to pounce? Did House Stark intend to crown Stannis if Robert died? Catelyn and Robb could offer few certainties, only that Ned had asked for reinforcements to secure the capital and protect the rightful succession. Some lords grumbled, referencing the old feuds with southern houses, but the memory of the near coup a year before was enough to unify most of them. Better to stand with Ned Stark, they reasoned, than let the Lannisters or a Targaryen usurper rule unchecked. Bran remained in the background, quietly observing as more and more men crowded Winterfell's halls. They set up tents in the courtyard and along the outer bailey, building fires against the cold. The nights rang with the clamor of hundreds of voices, flickering torchlight, and the howls of restless deerwolves. Sansa ventured out sometimes to see the arrival of lords in their finery, but she seemed subdued, likely recalling how close her father had come to losing his head once before. Arya prowled the edges, occasionally drawn to watch the men practice in the yard. One afternoon, as the yard was filled with the clang of swords, Theon Greyjoy approached Robb, a grin on his lips. "We should strike south immediately, give those Lannisters a taste of the North steel. Waiting here in the snow does no good if Robert kicks the bucket tomorrow." Robb glowered, shaking his head. "We can't simply march on King's Landing. Father wanted a measured response, not a reckless assault. Besides, we need to coordinate with the Riverlands if we're to cross the neck." Theon shrugged. "You might find the Riverlords are too busy protecting themselves from Tywin's forays. Word is bands of Lannister outriders have been harrying the border villages. The Tullys might not have men to spare." "One by sustain." Catelyn, overhearing, interjected, "That's exactly why we must not act rashly, Theon. If we ride south unprepared, we could be cut off, or defeated in detail. We need strategy, not bravado." Theon gave a nonchalant bow and strode off. Robb muttered that Theon was quick to stoke conflict, perhaps forgetting that the Greyjoys once rose in rebellion themselves. Bran, watching from near the stable entrance, felt uneasy. The tension was palpable, and if King Robert died, that tension would likely snap into open war. In the midst of these preparations, another raven arrived from Jon Snow at the wall. It was short and terrified in tone. Jon wrote that the great ranging had gone out beyond the wall and returned in tatters. Men reported glimpsing things that walked by night impervious to most blades. Several men had been slain, and their corpses rose again, attacking the living with ice-cold hands. Jon had fought one in the courtyard of Castle Black itself, eventually discovering that fire could stop it. He wrote, "I beg you, warn Father. Warn the king if he yet lives. The White Walkers are real, and they have servants among the dead. They can only be defeated by fire or possibly dragonglass. We must unite the realm against them, or all is lost." When Catelyn read the letter aloud to the assembled lords in Winterfell's great hall, a storm of disbelief and horror broke out. Some scoffed at the idea of walking corpses, calling it an outlandish fable. Others looked truly shaken. Robb rose and proclaimed that they should send immediate reinforcements to the wall, but the older northern lords argued that the realm's crisis in the south had to be dealt with first. A portion of the men seemed torn, uncertain whether to believe Jon's account. The great hall rang with shouts, while Bran trembled silently. It was everything he had feared. The real threat might go unanswered because men refused to believe it, or because they found their southern power struggles more pressing. Catelyn, face grave, finally calmed the hall by raising her hand and speaking clearly. "We must do both. The Night's Watch is our shield in the north, and if they are threatened, so are we. But House Stark has never abandoned its allies in the south, nor will we let the Lannisters overthrow the rightful king. Let us pray Eddard Stark can hold the capital until we arrive. We will send a small contingent north with dragonglass and supplies, as promised, while the main host marches south to secure the throne. That is the best we can do with the men." Robb nodded in agreement, though frustration gleamed in his eyes. "I'll lead the southern host, Mother. You stay here, keep Winterfell strong. Or if you prefer, you can lead and I'll remain." "Lily." She shook her head gently. "You are the war leader now. Your father entrusted that to you. I will remain in Winterfell to safeguard your brothers and sister and to keep the north together. Go, and may the gods watch over you." So it was decided. Over the coming days, final preparations were made. The northern banners that had answered the call of House Stark prepared to march south through the neck, gather at Moat Cailin, and then proceed toward the Riverlands. Robb would lead this force, with Theon Greyjoy by his side, along with many of the prominent bannermen. Umber, Glover, Mormont, Serwyn, and more. A smaller force, led by some of the loyal Bolton men and accompanied by a handful of Stark rioters, would venture to the wall with the dragonglass. The rest would remain to defend Winterfell. Bran watched it all unfold in a mixture of awe and dread. On the night before Robb's departure, the family gathered around the hearth in the great hall once again, though a chill seemed to permeate the stone walls. Catelyn stood beside Robb, adjusting a clasp on his cloak. Arya lingered, eyes darting from face to face. Sansa was absent, claiming illness again, though rumors said she was upstairs weeping. Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog in a corner. Bran felt the tension in every breath. "You'll need to be strong," Catelyn told Robb. "The men will look to you for leadership, for their morale. A single word from you could mean their lives or deaths. Remember your father's lessons." Robb swallowed hard, but his voice was steady. "I'll remember, I swear it." Catelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You are a Stark of Winterfell. We must protect this realm from tearing itself apart when the real threat might be at our gates." She glanced at Arya and Bran. "We do this for all the people, not just for House Stark." That night, Bran found sleep elusive. He drifted off close to dawn, only to be seized again by a vision. Shapes gliding across a frozen wasteland, their eyes burning blue as they raised an army of silent, dead men. Then the vision shifted to a great city by the sea, where fires raged amid stone towers, and a woman's voice cried out in a language Bran could not understand. He sensed dragons, though he saw only flickers of scaly tails and the outlines of wings. Finally, he glimpsed King's Landing in chaos, the Iron Throne standing empty while men killed one another for its seat. All these images spun around him like shards of a broken mirror, each reflecting a sliver of doom. He woke, breathing hard, drenched in sweat despite the chill. Summer stood at the foot of the bed, hackles raised, golden eyes fixed on Bran as if sensing his alarm. Outside, the horns sounded a low, mournful note, heralding the march of Robb Stark's host. Bran thought of the countless tragedies that might unfold, the blood that might be spilled, and he prayed once more that the realm could be steered away from absolute ruin. By midday, Robb's army had departed, banners snapping in the icy wind, men's breath steaming around their horses. The courtyard felt strangely empty afterward. Catelyn kept her composure, but Bran could see the worry etched in her eyes. She put on a brave face for Rickon, who didn't fully grasp why yet another family member was leaving. Arya muttered that she was tired of waiting around and wanted to ride out to see the world for herself, but the flinty look on Catelyn's face told her such talk wouldn't be tolerated. In the quieter days that followed, Bran often found himself in the Godswood, seeking solace among the ancient trees, sometimes leaning against the heart tree's trunk and letting Summer rest her head on his lap. Hodor would stand nearby or sit on a rock, humming softly. The wind whispered through the bare branches, and occasionally, Bran swore he heard an almost human sigh from the carved face in the weirwood. He would close his eyes and reach out with his mind, trying to glean some hint of how this all would end, how the war in the south, the threat in the north, and the rumored dragons across the sea might converge. But the old god spoke only in riddles, or perhaps not at all, and Bran felt as though he was peering into a vast darkness where any number of shapes might lurk. He still remembered the sense of triumph he'd felt months ago, knowing he had helped avert his father's death and prevented the worst immediate outcome. The realm tearing itself apart under a Lannister puppet king. Yet the cost of that success, it now seemed, was to prolong the troubles, to give them new forms. Instead of a swift tragedy, the kingdom was in slow, smoldering turmoil, threatened on multiple fronts by multiple foes. Perhaps that was always the way of the world. Perhaps one victory only led to the next battle. And so he breathed in the cold, listening to the secrets of the wind, praying to the nameless gods that his father would hold King's Landing together, that Robb would not charge blindly into war, that Jon and the Night's Watch would find a way to halt the White Walkers, and that somehow Daenerys Targaryen would stay far across the sea with her rumored dragons. He prayed that the realm he loved, the realm he had fought to save with a single letter, would not drown in blood and ice. But winter had truly come, and with it arrived the unstoppable momentum of all these forces. In the hush of the Godswood, as the last light of day retreated behind the walls, Bran felt a silent certainty that the greatest trials lay just ahead. He could only keep faith that, as before, Small actions and dire warnings might shift fate again. After all, the future was not set in stone. Even if the storms gathered on every horizon, House Stark had weathered storms before. Perhaps, by the grace of the old gods, they would weather this one too. He closed his eyes, felt summer's warmth against his legs, and let himself slip into a half-doze. And in that fragile twilight between waking and dreaming, he caught a whisper of a voice, his own voice, or something older, saying, "We have done it once, and we can do it again. We must. For winter is here, and only through unity can the living stand against the dead." He clung to that thought as darkness gently folded over Winterfell, and the wild wind beyond the walls howled like a distant wolf, echoing the shape of the battles yet to come.